Hello guys, welcome to Vision Harry. Today we have an incredible story for you. What if Gringotts' blood test at Harry's age 8 found he owned 67% of Wizarding Britain and Dumbledore was illegally renting his properties? If you enjoy the video, please like and subscribe. Let's get into it. Chapter 1, The Ledger. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Not that Tuesdays meant anything special on Privet Drive. Every day on Privet Drive was more or less the same. Breakfast at 7, Dudley's cartoons at 8, Harry's chores by 9, and the slow grey crawl of hours until bedtime. The letter, therefore, was not addressed to Harry. Letters were never addressed to Harry. This one was addressed to Vernon Dursley, printed on thick cream parchment with a wax seal Harry didn't recognize, a small pickaxe crossed over a set of scales, and Vernon had gone an interesting shade of puce the moment he'd read the first line. "This is nonsense," Vernon said, to no one in particular. He folded the letter. Unfolded it. Read it again. "This is absolute nonsense." Harry was washing the breakfast dishes and doing a very good job of looking like he wasn't listening. "Who sends a letter like this?" Vernon demanded of Petunia, who had gone quite still in the way she always did when anything to do with the wizarding world entered her kitchen. She took the letter from Vernon's thick fingers and read it herself, and whatever color she had drained out of her face entirely. "They want to see him," Petunia said quietly. "They can want all they like, Vernon." Her voice had a particular edge. "It's from a bank. A very old bank. It says if we don't bring him they'll send representatives here." The word "here" landed in the kitchen like a stone in a pond. Harry turned off the tap. "Who's sending representatives here?" "No one," Vernon said. "Gringotts," Petunia said at the same moment, and Vernon shot her a look of absolute betrayal. Harry dried his hands on a dish towel and turned around. He was a small boy, undersized for 8 years old, with black hair that never did anything it was told and eyes that were very green and very steady. Most adults found his steadiness unsettling. Vernon found it infuriating. "Gringotts," Harry repeated. "That's the wizard bank." "You don't know anything about any wizard bank," Vernon said. "Dudley's friend Marcus told me." This was a lie. Harry had read it in a library book, one of 3 books about magic he'd found in the discarded section of the little whinging library. He'd memorized all 3. He kept them under the loose floorboard in his cupboard beneath the stairs. "What do they want?" Vernon's face cycled through several colors before settling on a deep, committed red. "It doesn't matter what they want, they've flagged a dormant account," Petunia said, still looking at the letter. She had a voice like she was reading a death sentence. "An inheritance audit. They say it's routine. When accounts go unmanaged past a certain period, they conduct an audit." She lowered the letter and looked at Harry for a long moment with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Not unkind, exactly. Just complicated. They want to see you, Harry." "Then I'll go," Harry said. Vernon opened his mouth. "I'll go," Harry said again, and something in the way he said it, not loud, not aggressive, just completely, calmly certain, made Vernon close his mouth again. They took him the next morning. Gringotts' bank sat in the middle of Diagon Alley like it had always been there and always would be, vast and white and faintly menacing in the way that only very old buildings full of very serious money ever managed to be. Harry stood on the white marble steps and looked up at it and felt something he couldn't immediately name, not excitement, exactly. Something quieter. Like recognition. Vernon was sweating through his shirt and had been since they'd crossed into Diagon Alley through the leaky cauldron, where every head had turned to look at Harry and he still didn't understand why. He'd kept his fringe over his forehead out of habit, because Petunia preferred it that way, but people kept looking anyway, quick, startled double takes, whispers behind hands, a woman near the apothecary who'd actually gasped and clutched her friend's arm. Harry had ignored all of it. He was very good at being ignored and, it turned out, equally good at ignoring. Inside Gringotts, the goblins behind the long counters did not look up when they entered, which Harry found almost refreshing. He'd been shown to a side corridor by a goblin with an expression like weathered stone who had introduced himself, curtly, as Sharpclaw, and who had led them through 3 sets of doors, each more secure than the last, to a room that was nothing like the cavernous main hall. This room was oak-paneled and quiet, with a fireplace that burned green and a round table that had papers on it, very neat, very precisely arranged. Behind the table sat the oldest goblin Harry had ever seen, though, admittedly, he hadn't seen many. "Mr. Potter," the goblin said. His voice was like gravel being poured slowly down a stone chute. "My name is Ragnarok. I am senior account manager for the Potter, Black, and Associated Heritage Accounts. Please sit." Harry sat. Vernon, who had not been invited to sit, hovered near the door. Ragnarok glanced at him with the particular expression of someone noticing a smell. "This meeting is with the account holder," Ragnarok said. "You may wait outside." "I am his legal guardian," Vernon began. "You are his muggle guardian," Ragnarok said, "which in matters of wizarding inheritance carries no more legal weight than your opinion of our decor." He looked back at Harry. "The door, Mr. Dursley." The extraordinary thing, the thing Harry would think about later, was that Vernon left. He just turned around and left. He wasn't accustomed to being talked to that way. He wasn't accustomed to obeying. But something in Ragnarok's voice had the quality of very deep, very still water, and Vernon Dursley was not, fundamentally, a brave man. The door clicked shut. For a moment it was just Harry and the goblin and the green fire. "You know why you're here," Ragnarok said. It wasn't a question. "The letter said dormant account audit," Harry said. "I don't know what that means exactly." Ragnarok looked at him for a long moment. His eyes were amber, sharp, and very old. "It means," he said, "that we noticed something. And when Gringotts notices something, we are obligated to investigate. We are further obligated to inform the account holder." He picked up the top sheet from the stack before him, examined it briefly, and set it down again. "What do you know about your parents, Mr. Potter?" "They died in a car crash," Harry said, which was what he'd been told. He said it with the same flat tone he always used for things he didn't believe. Ragnarok's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. "Your parents," he said carefully, "were James Charles Potter and Lily Evans Potter. They died on the 31st of October, 1981. They did not die in a car crash." "I know," Harry said. Ragnarok looked at him again, that measuring, amber look. Then, for the first time, something shifted at the corner of his mouth that might have been the very distant ancestor of respect. "Your father was the last male heir of the House of Potter, which is itself the last surviving branch of the House of Peveril." He paused. "Are you familiar with the Peverils?" "3 brothers," Harry said. "Old story. The Deathly Hallows." Something in the room changed. Ragnarok set down the paper he'd picked up and folded his hands. "Where did you hear that name?" "Library book." Harry watched the goblin's face. "Is it true?" "It is considerably truer than most people know." Ragnarok pulled a second, heavier folder from beneath the first and opened it to a page dense with columns of numbers. "Mr. Potter. What I am about to show you is the full inheritance ledger for the Potter Peveril estate. I want you to look at it carefully before I explain, because it is important that you understand the numbers before you hear the implications." He turned the folder around and slid it across the table. Harry looked at it. The columns were dense and precise, the way Goblin accounting always was, dates going back centuries, property listings, vault numbers, investment portfolios, land grants and charter rights, and something listed simply as sovereign holdings. His eyes moved through it steadily, the way he taught himself to read, not skimming, not rushing, taking in each line. It took him about 4 minutes. He looked up. "This says 67%. "Yes," Ragnarok said. 67% of. Harry looked at the heading of that particular column again to make sure he'd read it correctly. "Of all foundational wizarding property in Britain." "Yes." Harry looked at the number again. It was not a small number. It was, objectively, an enormous number. He put his finger on it, not pointing, just touching it, the way you touched something to confirm it was real. How? Inheritance, Ragnarok said, and there was something in the word that carried the weight of centuries. The Potter line descends directly from Ignotus Peverell, the youngest of the three brothers, the one who received the cloak of invisibility and who, unlike his brothers, died naturally and passed his gifts to his son. The Peverell bloodline, in turn, carries a convergence claim going back significantly further, to what your records term the Merlin Accords, which established the foundational property grants for all wizarding settlements in Britain. He turned another page. Additionally, your family tree includes, through a maternal convergence 4 generations back, a dormant claim on the Slytherin estate, which had no surviving heirs after 1945, and an absorbed charter from the Gryffindor line through a secondary inheritance executed in 1612. He looked at Harry over the folder. The Peverell Potter claim, combined with these absorbed inheritances, constitutes the largest single private land holding in Wizarding Britain's recorded history. Harry was quiet for a moment. Outside, very faintly, he could hear the general noise of Gringotts, distant echoes of coins, trolleys, voices. In here, it was just the green fire and the old goblin and the most staggering thing anyone had ever said to him in his entire life. "Okay," Harry said. Ragnarok blinked. "Okay. I mean, that's a lot. I understand it's a lot. I'm still," he pressed his fingers together on the table. 8 years old. He was 8 years old and a very large part of him wanted to react the way he'd spent his whole life reacting to things that were too big, by going quiet, going small, tucking it away. He didn't do that. He chose not to do that, deliberately, in the space between one breath and the next. Who has been managing this? If the account is dormant, someone must have, yes, Ragnarok said. The word was flat as a stone. Someone has. He opened a third folder. Harry looked at the name at the top of the authorization documents and felt something go very cold and very still in his chest. Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. Appointed executor of the Potter estate, November 2nd, 1981. Indefinite term, pending majority of sole heir. He was appointed the day after my parents died, Harry said. Yes. Who appointed him? He appointed himself, Ragnarok said, with the counter-signature of a ministry official who was, at the time, under considerable pressure to cooperate. The appointment was legal, technically. The authorization documents were correctly filed. He turned the page. What was not legal was this. The next page was another column of numbers. Property management fees. Rental income from dozens of properties. Licensing fees for charter rights. Governance dividends from institutions, schools, shops, entire streets of Diagon Alley, that sat on Potter Peverell foundational land grants and therefore owed a percentage of their operating income to the estate's heir. The total, collected over 7 years, was a number that made the vault balance look modest. At the bottom of the column, there was a disbursement section. Harry read it line by line. Hogwarts Restoration Fund. Order of the Phoenix operational costs. Miscellaneous discretionary expenditures, Dumbledore APWB, he spent it, Harry said. A significant portion of it, Ragnarok said. Some was reinvested in estate properties, he was not, to be clear, simply stealing for personal enrichment. Much of it was spent on causes he deemed worthy. A pause. He did not ask your permission. He did not notify you of its existence. He did not, to our knowledge, make any arrangements to inform you at any point. He put me in a cupboard, Harry said. Ragnarok went very still. Harry hadn't meant to say it out loud. He looked at the table, then back up at Ragnarok, and his jaw was set in the way it got when he wasn't going to let something show. My aunt and uncle. He placed me with them. I sleep in a cupboard under the stairs. I do all the housework. My cousin gets everything and I get, he stopped. Looked at the numbers again. I own 67% of Wizarding Britain and I sleep in a cupboard. The silence that followed was not a comfortable silence. It was the kind of silence that has a shape, dense and pressing and hot at the edges. Ragnarok stood up. He was short, as goblins were, but when he stood there was nothing small about him. He walked to the fireplace and stood with his back to Harry for a moment, and Harry had the strange impression that the goblin was very, very angry, and was doing him the courtesy of not showing it directly. "Mr. Potter," Ragnarok said, to the fire. "Gringotts operates on a principle that is older than this building. Older than the Ministry. Older than Hogwarts." He turned around. "What is ours, we protect. What belongs to our clients, we protect as fiercely as our own. What has been done to your account, and to you, is not merely a financial irregularity." His amber eyes were very bright. "It is an insult to Gringotts. And we do not forgive insults." Harry looked at him steadily. "What can be done?" Ragnarok smiled, and it was not a pleasant smile, but it was a real one, sharp and satisfied. "Considerably more than Albus Dumbledore is currently anticipating," he said. "But first, we need to confirm your identity and your claim formally." He pulled a small, flat stone from a drawer beneath the table. It was smooth and dark, veined with something that pulsed faintly like a slow heartbeat. "Bloodline confirmation. 1 drop. Press your thumb here." Harry looked at the stone, then at Ragnarok. "What will it show?" "Exactly what you are," Ragnarok said. Harry pressed his thumb to the stone. It didn't hurt, a faint warmth, then a brief, bright sting, and then the stone lit up from the inside with a white light that turned, as Harry watched, to a deep gold. Lines appeared on the surface of it, spreading out from the central impression of his thumbprint like tree branches, and each line ended in a name. Potter. Peveril. Gryffindor. Slytherin. Merlin Compact, primary bloodline. The light held for a long moment, very bright and very steady. Then it faded. Ragnarok looked at the stone. His expression was the most human thing Harry had seen on his face, something between awe and deep satisfaction. "Well," the goblin said quietly. "There it is." "What is the Merlin Compact?" Harry asked. "The original founding charter of Wizarding Britain," Ragnarok said. "Before the Ministry, before Hogwarts, before the Wizarding. The compact established the terms under which magical beings and wizards would coexist and govern the island." He looked up from the stone. "The primary bloodline of that compact was granted sovereign stewardship over all established wizarding territories in perpetuity, to be held in trust for the magical community." He sat back down. "That bloodline is yours." Harry sat with that for a moment. The fire crackled. Somewhere deep below, a dragon, he'd read about those too, made a sound that traveled up through the stone floors like distant thunder. "I want to know everything," Harry said. "Every property. Every account. Every legal right. Everything Dumbledore collected and where it went." He put both hands flat on the table. "And I want to know what I can do about it." "That," Ragnarok said, pulling the first heavy ledger to the center of the table, "is exactly why I asked you here today." They were in that room for 4 hours. Harry learned things that afternoon that no 8-year-old had any business knowing: the interlocking structure of Wizarding Britain's land rights, the ancient charter system that predated the Ministry by 500 years, the specific legal mechanisms by which an executor's authority could be challenged and revoked, the distinction between a legal action filed through the Ministry's Department of Magical Law Enforcement and a formal grievance filed through Gringotts' own heritage court. Which was older, more powerful, and entirely beyond the Ministry's jurisdiction? He asked questions. A lot of them. He asked until Ragnarok called in a second goblin, Griphook, younger, faster, who brought additional ledgers, and he asked Griphook questions too. He wasn't performing intelligence or trying to seem impressive. He was just hungry for information the way he was always hungry, for everything, because knowledge was the one thing that had always been freely available to him in libraries, and he'd learned early that it was more useful than anything else. "You understand the legal distinction," Ragnarok said at one point, not as a question. He was watching Harry work through the third ledger. "An executor's authority is administrative," Harry said without looking up. "They manage the estate, but they can't claim rights to the income. The income belongs to the heir. If Dumbledore was collecting rents and governance dividends and putting them into order funding, that's not administration, that's conversion." He looked up. "That's theft. Dressed up nicely, but theft." Ragnarok and Griphook exchanged a look. "Yes," Ragnarok said simply. "Can he be prosecuted?" "Through Gringotts Heritage Court, yes," Ragnarok said. "Through the Ministry, that is more complicated. He has friends there." "Then we use Gringotts Court," Harry said. "And we make sure every move we make is so completely, legally airtight that there is no room for his friends to help him." He set down the ledger. "I want a solicitor. A real one. Someone Dumbledore doesn't know." Ragnarok folded his hands on the table. "We have several in our employ. Humans, as the Wizengamot requires a human advocate, but they are retained by Gringotts and they are very good." He paused. "There is also the question of your living situation." "I can't go back to the Dursleys," Harry said. "No," Ragnarok said. "You cannot. To be direct, we will not permit it." He said it calmly, simply, as if it were a financial decision, which perhaps it partly was. "As Lord Potter Peverell, which is your formal title, and which I will now use, you have the right to petition for wizarding guardianship. The most appropriate candidate, given the circumstances, would be someone of sufficient standing and legal credibility to contest Dumbledore's existing guardianship arrangement." He picked up a quill. "I have someone in mind." "Who?" "Augusta Longbottom," Ragnarok said. "Head of the Longbottom family. A member of the Wizengamot. She has no particular love for Albus Dumbledore, for reasons of her own, and considerable political credibility. She would be difficult to dismiss." He looked at Harry. "She would also not be a pushover. She would have opinions about how you should be raised." Harry considered this. "As long as she doesn't put me in a cupboard, I think I can manage someone having opinions." Ragnarok wrote something on a fresh sheet of parchment. "There is one more thing," he said, not looking up. "The Dumbledore matter, the legal action, the recovery of funds, will become public. It will become very public, very quickly. People will have reactions." He finished writing and looked up. "You are 8 years old. Much of the wizarding world believes you to be their greatest hero and their greatest tragedy. They have built a story about you. Your reappearance, your emergence, will disrupt that story significantly." A pause. "Are you prepared for that?" Harry thought about the cupboard. About the chores, and Dudley's hand-me-down clothes, and the way Petunia looked at him sometimes, not with malice, exactly, but with a particular exhausted guilt she never chose to examine. He thought about 7 years of being told he was nothing, and the fact that somewhere in this building there was a ledger that said he was the opposite of nothing. He thought about Dumbledore, a name everyone said with reverence, a man Harry had never met, who had made himself the executor of an estate that wasn't his and used it to fund a war that had gotten Harry's parents killed. "I'm not trying to disrupt anyone's story," Harry said. "I just want mine." Ragnarok looked at him for a long moment. Then he picked up the parchment he'd been writing on, folded it precisely, sealed it with a press of his ring, and handed it to Griphook. "Draft the formal notices," he said. "Lord Potter Peverell's estate solicitor, the Wizengamot Records Office, and Madame Longbottom." He stood. "And prepare the vault access documents. Full access, immediate effect." He looked at Harry. "You will need resources. How much is in the vault?" Harry asked. Ragnarok told him. Harry blinked. "Yes," Ragnarok said, with that same sharp, satisfied smile. that. They brought Vernon back in after that, which was considerably less interesting and considerably more unpleasant, but necessary. Ragnar's human legal liaison, a brisk, sharp-eyed witch named Madeline Voss, who introduced herself with a handshake that meant business, sat beside Harry and explained, in terms that left no interpretive room, what was happening. Vernon Dursley was being informed that his ward was withdrawing from his care, effective immediately. The guardianship was being contested through both Gringotts Heritage Court and the Wizarding. He would receive documentation within 48 hours. He was not to remove Harry from his current address before that documentation arrived, as this would constitute obstruction of an active heritage proceeding, and Gringotts took an extremely dim view of obstruction. "You can't just," Vernon started. "We can," Madeline Voss said pleasantly. "We are. Do you have any questions?" Vernon looked at Harry, who was sitting calmly with his hands folded on the table, looking at nothing in particular with those steady green eyes, and whatever Vernon saw there made him close his mouth. "I want it on the record," Petunia said suddenly, from the doorway. She'd come in halfway through, silent, and no one had really noticed, that we did what we were asked. "We kept him safe." Her voice was tight. "Whatever else, we did that." Harry looked at her. She was looking at the table, not at him, and her hands were knotted together in her lap, and he understood that this was as close as she was going to get to an apology, and it was also, in some complicated way, true. He didn't forgive her. He didn't not forgive her. He just let it sit there, because some things needed more time than one afternoon. "It's noted," Madeline Voss said, writing something. Harry went home to number 4, Privet Drive, and slept in his cupboard one last time. He didn't sleep much. He lay in the dark with the ledger numbers running through his head, every column, every figure, every property name, and he thought about a man named Dumbledore who had looked at a dead couple's 1-year-old son and decided that the best way to protect him was to hide him in a cupboard and spend his inheritance, and who had apparently never once questioned whether that was right. There was a word for that, Harry thought. Several words, actually. He lay in the dark and arranged them carefully, like tools on a workbench, and when he finally slept it was the deep, certain sleep of someone who has just decided exactly who they are. He was back at Gringotts the next morning, before Vernon had finished his first cup of tea. He'd packed his 3 library books, his small collection of photographs, just 2, both from a cardboard box Petunia had once almost thrown away, and a change of clothes. He'd left the Dursleys' house with his chin up and his shoulders square, and he hadn't looked back, not because it was dramatic or symbolic but simply because there was nothing there he needed to see again. Ragnar met him at the side entrance. "Your solicitor is already working," the Goblin said, leading him back through the oak-paneled corridor. "The first notices were sent this morning, to Dumbledore's office at Hogwarts and to the Ministry's Department of Magical Inheritance." He glanced sidelong at Harry. The official notice of account recovery and executor challenge was filed at 7 a.m. "Has he responded?" "Not yet." A pause. "He will." In the round room, there were more goblins this time, and Madeline Voss, and a second solicitor, a tall, thin wizard named Castleton who specialized in heritage law and had the focused energy of someone who genuinely enjoyed a complicated legal fight. He shook Harry's hand with both of his. "Lord Potter Peveril," he said, and the title landed differently now than it had yesterday, more real, more solid. "I've spent the night reviewing the estate documents. I have to tell you, in 30 years of inheritance law, I have never seen a case quite like this one." He said it with relish, not distress. "Good," Harry said. "I want it on the record immediately, every legal action, every notice, everything filed before Dumbledore has a chance to respond and muddy the water." Castleton looked at Madeline Voss. Madeline Voss looked at Castleton. They both looked at Harry. "Already done," Castleton said. "I filed the executor challenge, the income recovery petition, the formal account fraud notification to the Gringotts Heritage Court, and a preliminary Wizarding notification of the guardianship contestation." He sat down and spread his papers on the table. "There is also the matter of the Hogwarts charter." Harry looked up. What about it? Castleton pulled a specific document from his stack, old parchment, almost amber with age, covered in tiny, dense script. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry was built on land that falls within the Peveril Potter Foundational Charter. The school's original charter, signed in 993 AD, includes a governance clause, specifically, that the land trust holder holds a permanent seat on the school's board of governors with right of veto over certain classes of decision. He looked up. That's you. Harry looked at the document. He was 8 years old and apparently had a permanent seat on the board of the most prestigious school in Britain. They won't like that, he said. Several governors will have strong feelings, Castleton agreed. Particularly Lucius Malfoy, who currently holds a politically influential position on that board. Malfoy. Harry turned the name over. Is Malfoy Manor on Potter Peveril foundational land? Castleton flipped to another page. The eastern third of the Wiltshire estate. Including the formal entrance grounds and the primary wards. He looked up again. Which means the manor's primary ward anchors are, legally, built on land where you hold superior title. They would need your permission, technically, to maintain those wards. A pause. This is going to be a significant conversation. Make a note of it, Harry said, but don't send that notice yet. I want to approach the Malfoys directly. He looked at Ragnarok. There's more value in a conversation than a legal threat. Ragnarok's amber eyes gleamed. Indeed there is. It was a very Gringotts sentiment. By mid-morning, the response from Dumbledore arrived. It was a letter, handwritten, distinctive, and absolutely impeccable in its tone, warm, concerned, addressed to my dear Harry, as if they had a relationship, as if they'd met, as if Dumbledore was a familiar figure rather than the name at the top of a ledger that had spent 7 years spending Harry's inheritance. Harry read it once, quietly, and set it on the table. My dear Harry, I have this morning received a most alarming communication from Gringotts, which I believe may be the result of a significant misunderstanding. The arrangements made after your parents' unfortunate deaths were made entirely in your best interest, and I would very much like the opportunity to speak with you and explain the full picture. It went on for 2 pages. It was very well written. It was calm, measured, reasonable sounding, and it did not once acknowledge that the money had been spent without authorization, that Harry had been kept ignorant of his own estate, or that there was anything to answer for. Harry turned it over and looked at the blank side for a moment. Draft a response, he said to Madeline Voss. Simple. Lord Potter Peveril acknowledges receipt of your communication. All correspondence regarding the Potter Peveril estate is to be directed to Solicitor Edmund Castleton. Lord Potter Peveril is not available for informal meetings. He thought for a moment. Add, Gringotts Heritage Court has been notified and proceedings are underway. Lord Potter Peveril does not consider this a misunderstanding. He watched Madeline write it down. Then he looked at the letter again and, very quietly, folded it in half. There was a sound, sometime that afternoon, from somewhere deep in the building, a messenger owl arriving at the Gringotts correspondence desk, and a minute later Griphook came in with a sealed letter from Augusta Longbottom. Mr. Ragnarok, I have received your communication with interest and no small degree of fury. The boy is a Potter and a Peveril and he deserves a great deal better than what I understand he has received. I will come at 3 o'clock tomorrow. Please have tea ready. I do not negotiate without tea. Ragnarok read it and handed it to Harry. Harry read it and laughed, a real laugh, sudden and surprised, the kind that he forgot he was capable of sometimes. It transformed his face entirely. I think I'm going to like her, he said. She will push back, Ragnarok warned. She has strong opinions about proper wizarding upbringing. Good, Harry said. I have strong opinions about everything. We should get along fine. He spent the rest of the afternoon going through vault access documents, learning the names of every property in the estate, and building a list, organized by priority, cross-referenced with the legal actions already in motion, of everything he intended to do next. Castleton watched him work and didn't interrupt, which Harry appreciated. At one point, toward the end of the afternoon, Ragnock came and stood beside him at the table. "You know," the Goblin said, "in 400 years of managing wizarding inheritances, I have never once seen a client receive news like what you received yesterday and respond by asking for the ledgers." Harry didn't look up from his list. "What do most people do?" "Cry," Ragnock said. "Rage. Faint, occasionally. Ask how quickly they can have a new racing broom." He paused. "You asked for the ledgers." Harry looked up at that. He considered saying something modest or deflecting, the way he usually did when adults seemed to be paying him the kind of attention he didn't know what to do with. He didn't. "I spent 7 years being told I was nothing," Harry said simply. "I've got one chance to make sure it can never happen again. Of course I asked for the ledgers." Ragnock held his gaze for a long moment. "Yes," the Goblin said. "Of course you did." Outside, the sun was going down over Diagon Alley, orange light cutting through the windows in long, warm bars. Somewhere in Scotland, in a high tower of a very old school, Albus Dumbledore was reading a legal notification from Gringotts Heritage Court and experiencing something he was not accustomed to. Harry picked up his quill and went back to his list. He had a great deal to do. Chapter 2, The Reckoning. Augusta Longbottom arrived at precisely 3 o'clock. Not 3:01. Not 2:59. 3 o'clock exactly, which told Harry something about her before she'd said a word. She came through the side entrance in a set of robes that were deep burgundy and extremely well cut, with a hat that had a stuffed vulture on it. Harry noticed the vulture immediately and decided it was either eccentric or deliberate and suspected it was both. She walked like someone who had never once in her life considered whether she had the right to be somewhere. She simply arrived and the room reorganized itself around her. She stopped when she saw Harry. He was standing beside the round table. He'd stood up when he heard the door, because it seemed right, some instinct about meeting someone important, and she looked at him for a long moment with sharp brown eyes that missed nothing. "You have your father's jaw," she said. "And your mother's eyes, which everyone will tell you endlessly, so I'll only say it once." She sat down without being invited to, pulled off her gloves finger by finger, and looked at Ragnock. "Tea." A goblin appeared from somewhere with a tray. Harry sat back down. "Madam Longbottom," Ragnock said. "Ragnock." She poured her own tea, which Harry suspected was a signal of some kind, independence, or familiarity, or both. "I've read everything you sent me. I've also consulted 3 colleagues on the Wizengamot and made 2 fire calls this morning that I won't specify." She lifted her cup. "The situation is even worse than your letter suggested, because the Ministry's Department of Magical Inheritance has apparently known about the dormant status of the Potter accounts for at least 4 years and chose not to act." She looked at Harry. "Someone told them not to." "Dumbledore," Harry said. "Almost certainly," Augusta said. "Though proving it will require documentation we don't yet have." She set her cup down. "Now. You want me as your guardian." "Ragnock suggested it," Harry said. I agreed. "Why?" He looked at her steadily. "Because you have standing in the Wizengamot, you're not connected to Dumbledore's network, and you're clearly not afraid of him." A pause. "And because Ragnock trusts you, and Ragnock is the only person I currently trust." Augusta's eyebrows went up slightly. "You trust a goblin over any witch or wizard you might choose." "I trust someone who has behaved honestly and acted in my interest," Harry said. "Ragnock qualifies. So far, most witches and wizards don't." Augusta looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Ragnock. "He's 8. 8 years, 4 months, Ragnock said. "Extraordinary." She picked up her tea again. "All right. I'll take the guardianship, on conditions. You will be raised properly, that means wizarding culture, history, etiquette. You will be educated, there are tutors I trust. You will live at Longbottom House, at least temporarily, and you will be respectful of my household." She looked at him directly. I am not a soft woman, Harry. I have opinions and I will share them. But I will not put you in a cupboard, I will not pretend you don't exist, and I will fight anyone who tries to undermine your rights. A pause. Including Albus Dumbledore. Harry looked at her for a moment. Something in his chest, tight, guarded, always braced, eased by one small degree. That's acceptable, he said. The corners of Augusta's mouth moved. Not quite a smile but the suggestion of one. Good. Now. She set down her cup and folded her hands. Tell me everything Gringotts found. I want to hear it from you, not from a letter. So Harry told her. He didn't embellish. He went through it the way he'd gone through the ledgers, linearly, clearly, fact by fact, and Augusta Longbottom listened without interrupting, which was, Harry was beginning to understand, not something she did for just anyone. When he finished she was quiet for a moment. The Slytherin claim, she said. You're certain it's valid? Confirmed through bloodline test, Ragnarok said. That will cause difficulties, Augusta said. Half the Wizengamot will lose their minds when they hear it. Half of those will try to use it against you. She looked at Harry. Are you prepared for the word, Slytherin, to be attached to your name in every conversation for the foreseeable future? I don't especially care what house name is attached to me, Harry said. The Slytherin estate went dormant in 1945. There's no heir. The assets fold into mine by inheritance law. It's not a political statement, it's just accounting. Augusta stared at him. Then she made a sound that was unmistakably a laugh, quickly suppressed. Ragnarok, she said. I like him. I thought you might, Ragnarok said. The formal notices hit the Ministry of Magic at 9 the following morning like a stone through a greenhouse window. Castleton had timed it deliberately, morning, when the owls came in with the Daily Post, so that the notices would arrive simultaneously at the offices of the Minister for Magic, the head of the Department of Magical Inheritance, the chief warlock of the Wizengamot, and the Hogwarts Board of Governors. He'd also, with Harry's approval, sent a copy to the Daily Prophet's legal correspondent, not as a press release but as a formal notification of active legal proceedings, which was public record and which the correspondent would do with as she chose. Harry wasn't at the ministry when the notices hit. He was at Longbottom House, meeting Neville. Longbottom House was in the countryside, west of London, old stone walls, a garden that was clearly under someone's obsessive attention, rooms that smelled of wood polish and dried herbs. Harry arrived the evening before with his 2 photographs, his 3 books, and the clothes on his back, and Augusta had shown him to a room that was larger than the entire ground floor of number 4 Privet Drive and said, "You'll need things," in a tone that suggested she'd already arranged for things to appear, which she had. Neville was at breakfast when Harry came downstairs. He was a round-faced boy, slightly chubby, with kind eyes and an expression of permanent mild anxiety that Harry recognized immediately, not because he felt it himself, but because he'd seen it in mirrors for years before he'd decided to stop. Neville was the kind of boy who apologized for things before he'd done them. He was also, Harry noticed, very carefully positioning his breakfast plate as far from the table's edge as possible, the way someone did when they'd broken things before and been made to feel bad about it. Harry sat down across from him. "Hi," Harry said. "Hi," Neville said, and immediately knocked over his juice. The juice went across the table. Neville went the color of a tomato and started apologizing. Sorry, I'm so sorry," and reached for the napkin at the same time as a house elf appeared and efficiently dealt with it. "It's fine," Harry said. "I knocked mine over yesterday too. The table's uneven." The table was not uneven. Harry checked later. But Neville's shoulders came down out of his ears, and he looked at Harry with an expression of cautious gratitude, and that was the beginning of it. "You're Harry Potter," Neville said, after a moment. "Yes," Harry said. "Gran told me you were coming." He hesitated. "She said you're going to be living here for a while." "Looks like." "That's," Neville seemed to search for the right word. "That's okay. I mean. It's good. I mean, he stopped, clearly wishing he could start the sentence again. I don't have many friends. Neither do I, Harry said. None, actually. Neville looked at him. Really? But you're famous, apparently, Harry said. That's not the same thing as friends. Neville thought about this. No, he said slowly, I suppose it isn't. He picked up his fork and ate a piece of egg with the focused concentration of someone recalibrating. I like herbology, he offered. I don't know anything about herbology, Harry said. I could show you the greenhouse, Neville said, and the anxiety in his face gave way to something quiet and genuine. Gran's got a really good one. I've been growing mandrakes in the south corner, well, trying to. They're difficult. Show me after breakfast, Harry said. And that was, more or less, that. The owl from Dumbledore arrived at Longbottom House at 11. Harry was, at that moment, standing in the greenhouse with his hands in a pot of soil, helping Neville repot something that Neville called a puffapod and that seemed very pleased to be moved. He read the letter standing up, soil on his hands, Neville hovering a polite distance away trying not to look like he was trying to see who it was from. The letter was longer this time. Still warm in tone, still impeccably written. Dumbledore was concerned about the legal actions, which he characterized as a misunderstanding driven by incomplete information. He would very much like to explain the decisions that had been made. He expressed, in beautifully crafted language, his profound care for Harry's well-being and his certainty that a face-to-face conversation would resolve everything. He also, buried in the second-to-last paragraph, mentioned the protection that certain arrangements had been designed to provide, blood wards, specifically, contingent on Harry's placement with his nearest living relatives, and expressed his hope that the disruption of those arrangements would not leave Harry exposed to dangers that remained very real. Harry read that paragraph twice. He folded the letter. Neville, he said. What do you know about blood wards? Neville blinked. Ancient magic. They're protective. Gran has some on the house. He thought about it. They usually need a willing family anchor, I think. Someone who has to choose to take you in. Can they be recreated with a different anchor? I think so. A different family member, maybe, or, Neville frowned. Why? Harry handed him the letter. Neville read it, and his eyebrows went up, and he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, carefully, he's saying if you're not with the Dursleys, you're not protected. He's saying it might be a reason I should cooperate with him, Harry said. It's not quite a threat. But it's structured like one. He took the letter back and folded it into his pocket. Do you think Dumbledore is a good man? Neville hesitated. The kind of hesitation that means someone is deciding to be honest rather than safe. Gran doesn't think he's a bad man, Neville said slowly. She thinks he's a man who decided he was right about everything and then stopped checking. Harry looked at him. That's a very perceptive thing to say. Neville went slightly pink. It's Gran's line, really. Still good, Harry said, and went back to looking at the puffapod. I'm going to need to talk to Castleton about blood wards and whether any legal action I take affects them. He was thinking out loud, not really talking to Neville, but Neville was listening. If they're genuine, if there's a real protective element that needs to be maintained, I want to know what it costs to replicate them properly, without being dependent on the Dursleys. He paused. I'm not going back there. No, Neville agreed, with a quiet firmness that surprised them both slightly. You're not. Harry looked at him. Neville had gone pink again but held his gaze. Right, Harry said. After we finish here, do you want to come with me to Gringotts? Neville's eyes went wide. To Gringotts? Can I? I'm going to review the property portfolio with Ragnarok. It'll probably be boring. I don't mind boring, Neville said, with the enthusiasm of someone who very much meant it. At Gringotts that afternoon, Harry sat across from Ragnarok with Neville in the chair beside him, Neville trying very hard to look like he came to Gringotts meetings regularly, and went through the property list with a focus that made Castleton, sitting in the corner taking notes, look up repeatedly. 14 properties. 3 ancestral manor houses. Dozens of Diagon Alley buildings. Hogsmeade Street fronts. Charter land underlying Hogwarts, Hogsmeade Village, and 7 other established wizarding settlements. Investment portfolios in 3 countries. Income streams from licensing fees, governance dividends, and agricultural land held in trust across Scotland and Wales. The Hogwarts seat on the Board of Governors, Harry said. I want to activate it. Ragnarok leaned back. You are 8 years old. The board may contest, the charter says land trust holder, Harry said. Not land trust holder above the age of majority. The right is attached to the title, not to the person. He looked at Castleton. Correct? Castleton reviewed his notes. Strictly speaking, yes. The original charter uses the term the holder of the Peveril Compact, without age qualification. Dumbledore will certainly contest it, but the legal text supports your position. Send the notification, Harry said. There's also Lucius Malfoy, Ragnarok said. He's been expecting a response to yesterday's notification. His solicitor sent a preliminary inquiry this morning, notably, not a challenge. An inquiry. He tilted his head. Which suggests Malfoy is considering his options rather than fighting immediately. Good, Harry said. Set up a meeting. Not at Gringotts, somewhere neutral. I want to talk to him in person. Neville, who had been quiet through all of this, made a small sound. What? Harry said. Lucius Malfoy is. Neville searched for words. He's not a good person. His son Draco, we met once when we were small, he's very unpleasant. Malfoy is smart, Harry said. Unpleasant I can deal with. Smart means there's a conversation to be had. He paused. Though I think it might be Mrs. Malfoy who makes the actual decisions. Ragnarok's eyes glinted. An interesting read. The ward situation is what gives us leverage, Harry continued. They're not going to tear down the manor and rebuild the ward foundations, that's a reconstruction project of several years. They need the ward anchors, and a third of their foundational anchor points are on my land. He wasn't being cruel about it. He was being clear. I'm not going to revoke their rights out of spite. I'm going to have a conversation about what a reasonable arrangement looks like. And if they don't want a reasonable arrangement? Castleton asked. Then the legal position is very clear, Harry said simply. He moved on to the next item on the list. Neville watched him through all of this with an expression Harry couldn't quite identify, not awe, exactly, which Harry found he didn't particularly want. Something quieter. Like the look Neville had given the Puffapod when it had settled into its new pot and visibly relaxed. Satisfaction at something finding the right place. The formal confrontation, because that was what it was, whatever careful language surrounded it, happened on a Thursday morning in a Wizengamot conference chamber that smelled of old wood and older magic. It had been arranged through solicitors, both sides agreeing on a preliminary mediation that everyone understood was a pretense. Harry sat on one side of a long table with Castleton, Madeline Voss, and Augusta Longbottom. Across from them sat Dumbledore. This was the first time Harry had seen him. He was, undeniably, impressive. Tall, silver-bearded, robes of deep midnight blue with moons on them, half-moon spectacles over eyes that were, and Harry recognized this even as an 8-year-old who'd never learned to be seduced by it, extraordinarily warm. The warmth was genuine. That was the complicated thing. Dumbledore looked at Harry across the table and the look on his face was real care, real concern, real something that in another context might have been affection. Harry looked back at him and thought about the ledger. Harry, Dumbledore said, and his voice was warm too, resonant, the voice of someone who had comforted a great many people. I'm very glad to finally meet you. I know, Harry said. You've been managing my estate for 7 years. You know quite a lot about me. Something very small shifted behind Dumbledore's eyes. Not guilt, not quite. Something more like the recognition that this conversation was going to be different from what he'd anticipated. I'd like to explain the decisions that were made, Dumbledore said, addressing not just Harry but Augusta and Castleton, the way someone did when they were used to managing a room. There was a war. Your parents died at the hands of a man who was, and may still be, extraordinarily dangerous. The choices I made were made in the service of your protection. The choices you made, Augusta said, with the precise clip of someone who has been saving a sentence for 3 days, resulted in the heir to the largest wizarding estate in Britain living in a cupboard under a staircase for 7 years, without knowledge of his own identity, his own rights, or his own family history. Please explain to me which part of that constitutes protection. Dumbledore looked at Augusta. The blood wards are replicated, Harry said. Castleton arranged it. New anchor, same efficacy, independent of the Dursley residence. He watched Dumbledore absorb this. So that argument doesn't apply. A pause. Very brief. Harry saw Dumbledore recalibrate in real time, saw the slight reordering of his approach, and it was fascinating, actually, like watching a very good chess player realize their opening gambit had been countered before they'd even finished playing it. You're remarkably well prepared, Dumbledore said, and now the warmth had a new quality, something almost admiring. I had access to ledgers, Harry said. The inheritance income, Dumbledore said, leaning forward slightly, his tone shifting to something more direct, was not spent frivolously. It was used to rebuild institutions and fund efforts that protected. It wasn't yours to spend, Harry said. Not loudly. Not aggressively. Just as a fact. It wasn't your decision to make. I understand you thought you were doing right. I even accept that some of what you funded may have been genuinely worthwhile. He kept his eyes on Dumbledore's. But you made choices about my life and my property and my identity and my future without asking me, without telling me, and without at any point pausing to consider whether I might have a right to know. A beat. And then you put me in a cupboard. The room was very quiet. I did not instruct your aunt and uncle to house you in inadequate, you placed me with them without checking, Augusta said. Without oversight. Without a single follow-up visit in 7 years. The wards required a blood relative, Castleton said, not a specific living arrangement. As we have already addressed. He opened his folder. Lord Potter Peverell is here today not to negotiate the merits of your decisions, Headmaster. He is here to formally notify you that the executor authority granted in November 1981 is hereby contested and revoked, pending Heritage Court review. All estate income collected during your tenure is subject to full accounting and recovery proceedings. Gringotts Heritage Court has already accepted jurisdiction. He set a document on the table and slid it across. This is the formal notification. A courtesy copy. Dumbledore looked at the document. He did not pick it up immediately. Harry, he said, and his voice had changed, quieter now, more genuine, the performance stripped back, and what was underneath was something Harry hadn't expected, actual sadness. I believe Voldemort will return. I believe when he does, the wizarding world will need you. Everything I have done has been in service of that. If he returns, Harry said, I'll deal with it. Dumbledore blinked. You're 8 years old. I know, Harry said. I'll be 11 when I come to Hogwarts, which apparently gives us nearly 3 years. If you want to spend that time helping me prepare instead of arguing about money, I'm open to that. He paused. But the legal proceedings continue regardless. Those are separate from any other conversation. Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. Harry had been stared at before. He was used to it, the double-takes in Diagon Alley, the whispers, the looks. This was different. Dumbledore was looking at him the way you looked at something you'd expected to be one shape and found was completely another. You are nothing like what I expected, Dumbledore said finally, and it sounded like it was meant as something other than an insult, though it didn't quite land as a compliment either. "No," Harry said. "I'm not." He stood up, which signaled the end, and Castleton and Augusta stood with him. "Your response to the Heritage Court filing is due in 14 days. Castleton will handle correspondence." He looked at Dumbledore one more time. "I don't want to be your enemy. But I'm not going to pretend none of this happened." He walked out with Augusta's hand briefly, lightly on his shoulder, not steering him, not directing, just present, and Castleton behind them with his briefcase clicking. In the corridor, Augusta said quietly, "You did well." "I wanted to be angrier," Harry said. "I know. Anger isn't always the right tool." "I wasn't hiding it," Harry said. "It just wasn't what the moment needed." Augusta looked at him sidelong. "No," she said. "It wasn't." A pause. "Your mother was like that. I met her twice. She was very good at deciding what a moment needed." Harry didn't have anything to say to that. He walked beside Augusta through the ministry atrium, and outside the summer air hit them, warm, full of city noise, and he stood on the steps of the Ministry of Magic for a moment and breathed. Neville was waiting at the apparition point at the end of the street. Augusta had arranged it, told him to wait there, and when he saw them coming he straightened up with an expression of carefully contained anxiety that dissolved into relief when he saw Harry's face. "How did it go?" Neville asked. "It went," Harry said. It went well," Harry clarified. "Dumbledore knows where he stands. Castleton filed everything. Augusta was excellent." "I am always excellent," Augusta said, without breaking stride. "Come. There's dinner to get back to, and Neville, I saw you didn't finish your breakfast this morning." "I wasn't hungry. You're always hungry, you just get nervous and forget." She led the way with absolute certainty. "Harry, you as well. You need to eat. Strategic brilliance requires adequate nutrition." Harry and Neville fell into step behind her. "Is she always like this?" Harry said quietly. "Pretty much," Neville said. "You get used to it." "I don't think I'll need to get used to it," Harry said. "I think I actually like it." Neville looked at him with that quiet, genuine expression he'd had in the greenhouse. "Yeah," he said. "Me too." The Daily Prophet ran the story the next morning. It was not a small story. Potter heir emerges, Gringotts audit reveals scandal of historic proportions was the front page headline, and while Harry thought scandal of historic proportions was slightly dramatic, the reporting itself was accurate. Gringotts had confirmed the public record of the heritage proceedings, and the legal correspondent had done her job well. The story hit Wizarding Britain like a wave. Harry read it over breakfast at Longbottom House, eating toast and reading quickly, while Neville read over his shoulder and Augusta read her own copy across the table with a cup of tea and the expression of someone watching a chess piece move to exactly the square they'd expected. The letters started by 10 o'clock. Owls from strangers, some shocked, some supportive, some deeply agitated, several from people Harry had never heard of who apparently had strong opinions about the Potter Peverell estate. Castleton received a dozen inquiries from other solicitors. The Wisingamots Records Office confirmed the guardianship transfer. Madam Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, sent a formal request to review Gringotts' findings. At noon, an owl arrived from Narcissa Malfoy. It was brief, handwritten on cream paper in elegant script, and it said, "Lord Potter Peverell, I understand you wish to speak with me at your convenience. I am available Thursday afternoon. N. Malfoy." Harry read it and handed it to Ragnock, who had come for a midday update. "She reached out before we sent the meeting request," Harry said. "Yes," Ragnock said. "She's smart." "Set it up," Harry said. Thursday. Neutral ground, Gringotts' private room. He paused. "And Ragnock. The full ward analysis for Malfoy Manor, I want it before Thursday." "Already prepared," Ragnock said. Harry smiled. "Of course it is. Augusta watched this exchange and then looked back at her copy of the Prophet. There was a photograph on page 3, a Gringotts official photograph, formal, Harry in the round oak-paneled room looking at the camera with his hands folded on the table and Ragnarok beside him. He looked young and small and very, very steady. She turned the page, but the expression on her face as she did it, private, unobserved, was something that Neville, had he seen it, would have recognized from the times Augusta looked at photographs of his parents. It was the look of someone making a promise. Outside, the owls kept coming, and Wizarding Britain turned its eyes toward a boy it had thought it understood, and found it had no idea at all. Chapter 3, The Estate. The meeting with Narcissa Malfoy was on a Thursday, but Potter Manor came first. Ragnarok had arranged the visit for the Tuesday before, and Harry stood at the wrought iron gates of the property, somewhere in the Scottish borders, reached through a key-activated port key that Ragnarok had handed him in a small velvet box, and looked at his house for the first time. It was not a ruin. He'd half expected a ruin. 7 years of neglect and the general tendency of dramatic backstories to involve crumbling architecture had prepared him for broken windows and overgrown gardens and the general atmosphere of Gothic tragedy. Instead, Potter Manor was simply waiting. The grounds were wild but not dead. The stone was weathered but solid. The wards were dormant but intact, wrapped around the property like something sleeping, and when Harry stepped through the gate they stirred, a warmth that moved up through the soles of his feet and spread slowly outward, like the house recognizing something it had been waiting to recognize. Neville made a small sound beside him. "Do you feel that?" Harry asked. "The wards," Neville said, slightly awed. They like you. They recognize the bloodline," Ragnarok said, from Harry's other side. The Goblin had insisted on coming personally, which Harry suspected was less about professional duty and more about the fact that Ragnarok had been managing this estate for 30 years and had something personally invested in seeing it properly claimed. The Manor's core wards are keyed to Potter blood. They've been dormant since 1981. They will strengthen considerably now that you're here. Harry walked up the path. The front door opened before he touched it. Inside was dust and silence and the particular quality of light that comes through windows that haven't been opened in years, thick, amber, almost solid. But the bones of the place were extraordinary. High ceilings with carved plasterwork, a staircase that swept upward in a broad, graceful curve, rooms full of covered furniture that suggested quality rather than clutter. A library, Harry found it almost immediately, following some instinct or perhaps the faint warmth in the floorboards that seemed to grow slightly warmer in that direction, that was 2 stories tall with a wrought iron gallery running around the upper level and books on every wall. He stood in the middle of the library and turned slowly. "There are books here that aren't in any public collection," Ragnarok said from the doorway. The Potter Library was one of the finest private collections in Britain. Your father was not, himself, a scholar, but he inherited from a long line of men who were. Harry walked to the nearest shelf and pulled out a book at random. It was handwritten, someone's private research, bound in brown leather, dated 1743. He put it back carefully and pulled out another. A grimoire of ward theory. Another, a genealogical history of the Peveril line going back to what the author called the Preministry era, with annotations in the margins in at least 4 different hands. "I want to live here," Harry said. Augusta, who had been moving through the adjacent sitting room with the focused assessment of someone taking inventory, appeared in the doorway. "The manor needs considerable work before it's habitable as a primary residence." "I know," Harry said. "I want to start immediately." He looked at Ragnarok. "What's the process?" "You authorize the estate account to fund restoration," Ragnarok said. "We have contractors who specialize in wizarding properties, discreet, skilled, bonded to confidentiality." He paused. "It will take several months for full restoration. In the interim, Longbottom House remains your residence." "Fine." Harry walked back through the library, running his fingers lightly along the spines of books. "But I want to come here regularly. I want to work on the library." "Of course," Ragnarok said. Neville appeared at Harry's elbow. He'd been exploring with the quiet thoroughness of someone who found old houses genuinely interesting and was being respectful about showing it. "There's a greenhouse," he said. "Out back. It's overgrown but the structure is sound. There are plants in there that are, I don't know all of them, Harry, but some of them are really old. Like, really old varieties." Harry looked at him. "Would you help me with it?" Neville's face did the thing it did when he was trying not to look as pleased as he was. "Yes," he said, trying to sound casual and not quite managing it. "Obviously. Yes." Augusta made a sound that might have been approval and went back to her inventory. They spent 3 hours at Potter Manor. By the time they left, Harry had walked every room in the main house, made notes about the library's contents, identified which ward anchor points needed the most immediate attention, and authorized Ragnarok's contractors with a formal written instruction that Castleton had drafted in advance, because Harry had learned, in the week since Gringotts, that the answer to almost every situation was to be prepared before it arrived. The portkey took them back at sunset, the Scottish sky going orange and purple behind the manor's chimneys, and Harry looked back at it from the gate. He felt something he didn't have a word for. Not happiness exactly, or not only happiness. Something with more weight than that. The feeling of finding the edge of a thing you've been reaching for in the dark. He stepped through the gate and it clicked shut behind him. Thursday came clear and cold for late summer. Narcissa Malfoy was already in the Gringotts' private room when Harry arrived, which told him she'd come early, either anxious or strategic, and he was betting on strategic. She was blonde, precisely turned out, with the kind of composure that looked effortless and wasn't. She stood when Harry entered, which he noted. She didn't have to stand, and she knew it, and she'd done it anyway. "Lord Potter Peveril," she said. "Mrs. Malfoy," Harry said. He sat down and she sat back down and they looked at each other across the table with the careful attention of two people who had never met and were both doing a great deal of rapid assessment. She was, Harry thought, exactly what he'd expected from the letter, controlled, intelligent, here because she'd decided it was the smart play and not because anyone had forced her. Up close there was something else too, something careful around her eyes that wasn't quite wariness. More like someone who had spent a long time managing a situation they found uncomfortable. "I appreciate your flexibility on venue," Harry said. "I appreciated your directness," Narcissa said. "Not everyone approaches this kind of conversation with, what's the word, honesty about what's actually being discussed." "I don't see the point of being indirect about it," Harry said. "You're here because Eastern Malfoy Manor sits on Potter Peveril foundational land, and the ward anchor situation means you have a practical interest in what kind of neighbor I'm going to be." He folded his hands on the table. "So does." The corner of Narcissa's mouth moved, something that wasn't quite a smile but acknowledged one. "Lucius would prefer to contest the title claim." "Lucius can try," Harry said, and it wasn't a threat, just a fact. "Ragnarok's team has the foundational documents going back to 1087. The Malfoy purchase in 1641 was legitimate for its time and I'm not challenging it. They bought what they thought they were buying, which was full title. The problem is that the vendor in 1641 didn't actually hold full title because the Peveril Compact rights hadn't been properly discharged. That's a vendor issue, not a Malfoy issue." He paused. "Which means this isn't a fight, if you don't want it to be. It's a conversation about what a proper arrangement looks like going forward." Narcissa looked at him for a moment. "How old are you?" 8, Harry said. "Right." She looked at the table briefly, then back up. "What are your terms?" "A formal acknowledgement of the superior title," Harry said. "Which costs you nothing day-to-day. I have no interest in Malfoy Manor's internal operations and I'm not going to revoke your ward rights or require approval for routine maintenance. In exchange, the estate receives a modest annual charter fee. Castleton can discuss the amount, but it'll be fair, and I get honest information." Narcissa's composure shifted very slightly. "What kind of information?" "The kind that helps me understand the current state of Wizarding Britain," Harry said. "You move in political and social circles I don't yet. You know things about the current alignment of various factions, loyalties, who's doing what for whom. He kept his eyes on hers. I'm not asking you to betray your husband. I'm asking you to talk to me honestly when it matters. And if what matters involves my husband, she said. Then we'll navigate that when we get there, Harry said. With the understanding that I have no interest in destroying the Malfoy family. I have an interest in understanding what's happening and making sensible decisions based on that. Narcissa was quiet for a moment. She had, Harry noticed, very good control of her face. Most people in her position would be showing something, some tell of how the conversation was landing. She was giving him almost nothing. Almost. My son is at Hogwarts in 3 years, she said. Whatever the political landscape looks like, that's where he'll be. Same as me, Harry said. Yes. A pause. Lucius will resist this. The acknowledgement of superior title, he'll see it as a humiliation. The alternative is a heritage court proceeding that will be public and lengthy and won't go in his favor, Harry said. That would be considerably more humiliating. He let that sit for a moment. The arrangement I'm proposing is private. A matter of record but not one that requires announcement. Lucius can manage how it's presented. Something shifted in Narcissa's eyes. Not warmth, exactly. More like the recognition of someone who had found, unexpectedly, someone else who understood the actual texture of the situation she was navigating. I'll discuss it with him, she said. That's all I'm asking, Harry said. They were quiet for a moment. Outside the room, the ambient sound of Gringotts, gold, commerce, the deep business of old money, filled the silence comfortably. Can I ask you something? Narcissa said. Yes. What do you actually want? She said it directly, without framing, in a tone that was different from anything else she'd said, more personal. Not legally. Not strategically. When you've sorted out all the accounts and the properties and the proceedings. What is it you're actually trying to build? Harry considered the question. It was a good question. He'd been so focused on the immediate, the legal actions, the meetings, the portfolio, the logistics, that he hadn't articulated it even to himself in clean language. A Wizarding Britain that works properly, he said. Where the institutions are honest. Where the people in them are accountable. He paused. Where an 8-year-old who lost his parents isn't hidden in a cupboard for 7 years because one powerful man decided that was convenient. He looked at her. It doesn't seem like an unreasonable goal. Narcissa looked at him for a long time. No, she said quietly. It doesn't. The Hogwarts letter arrived the following Monday. Not an ordinary Hogwarts letter. Harry wouldn't be 11 for 3 years. This was a different kind of correspondence, thick and official, bearing both the Hogwarts seal and the seal of the Board of Governors, addressed to Lord H.J. Potter Peverell and delivered by an owl that was clearly accustomed to important deliveries and stood on the kitchen windowsill with the air of something awaiting a response. Harry opened it over breakfast with Neville watching from across the table. The letter was from the full Board of Governors, formally acknowledging the activation of the Peverell Charter seat. It was stiff in tone, several of the governors had clearly drafted their sections reluctantly, but it was legally compliant, which was what mattered. Attached was a schedule of the next board meeting, September 15th. Also attached was a personal note from Minerva McGonagall, deputy headmistress, written in brisk and precise handwriting that somehow managed to convey both efficiency and genuine character. Lord Potter Peverell, I am aware of the circumstances surrounding your emergence and have followed the recent proceedings with considerable interest. I should like to say, for what it is worth, that I knew your parents well and thought very highly of them both. I am also, since honesty appears to be the order of the day, aware that the situation at your previous residence was deeply unsatisfactory and I wish I had been in a position to do something about it sooner. I was not. I am sorry for that. I look forward to meeting you properly when circumstances allow, and to your being at Hogwarts in due course, whatever the circumstances of that enrollment. M. McGonagall. Harry read this twice. Then he folded it and put it in his pocket, which was where he kept the letters he intended to keep. "Who's that from?" Neville asked. "McGonagall," Harry said. "Hogwarts deputy. She sounds good." "She's strict," Neville said, with the certainty of someone who'd heard extensive reports. "Gran says she's completely fair, though. Just strict." "I don't mind strict," Harry said. He picked up the board letter again. September 15th. "Is that the board meeting?" "Yes." Harry set it down and reached for his toast. "I need to prepare for that." "Prepare how?" "There are 12 governors," Harry said. "I know 3 of them by name, Lucius Malfoy, who will be difficult, a witch named Arabella Figg, who Gran says is sensible, and a man named Tiberius Ogden, who Castleton says is old-fashioned but honest." He thought for a moment. "I need to know the others before September. What they care about, what they want from Hogwarts, where they'll push back." Neville looked at him. "You're going to prepare for a board of governors meeting the way other kids prepare for," he searched for a comparison. "I don't know. Quidditch?" "I've never played Quidditch," Harry said. "Neither have I," Neville admitted. "We should learn," Harry said. "Actually. Ragnarok mentioned there are brooms in the manor." Neville's face lit up in a way that was entirely different from any expression he'd worn in a professional context. "Really? Apparently my father was good." "Everyone says James Potter was brilliant at Quidditch," Neville said, and then looked slightly uncertain, like he wasn't sure if he should have said it. "You can say things like that," Harry said. "About my parents. I want to know about them." He looked at his toast. "No one's ever told me anything real about them. Ragnarok's given me the financial picture and Augusta's given me 2 or 3 actual things. Your dad laughed like this, your mum argued like that, and I want more of it." He looked up. "You didn't know them, I know, but things people say. It all helps." Neville nodded, serious. "I'll ask Gran. She knew them, not well, but she knew them. I'd appreciate that." They finished breakfast. Augusta came in, read the board letter over Harry's shoulder without asking, made a satisfied sound, and poured herself tea. "September 15th, she said. "I know," Harry said. "Lucius Malfoy will try to block your charter seat formally. He'll have briefed allies on the board." "I know that too." "You'll need to be prepared for, Augusta," Harry said, with the patient tone of someone who had, over the past 10 days, figured out the specific register that worked with her. "I'm already thinking about it." A pause. Augusta looked at him over her teacup. The corner of her mouth moved. "Yes," she said. "You are, aren't you?" The tutors started the week after. Augusta had arranged 3 of them, a magical theory tutor, a wizarding history and law tutor, and a combat magic instructor who she described as retired Auror, completely trustworthy, he won't coddle you. She'd made this last point with a particular emphasis that suggested she found coddling philosophically objectionable. The theory tutor was a thin, precise woman named Dorcas Vane who had the manner of someone who genuinely enjoyed making difficult concepts clear and did not enjoy pretending things were simpler than they were. Harry liked her immediately. She gave him a diagnostic test on the first day, graded it on the spot, and told him he had significant gaps in formal theory but very strong intuitive reasoning. "You've taught yourself," she said. "From library books." "Yes," Harry said. "That's both impressive and slightly problematic," she said. "You've built intuition without formal structure. We need to build the structure around the intuition without killing it." She opened her lesson plan. "This will take approximately 6 months if you work properly." "Then we'll work properly," Harry said. The history and law tutor was an older wizard named Phineas Ardmore who had served on the Wizarding as a junior clerk for 20 years and had opinions about everything. He was also, Harry quickly discovered, genuinely brilliant at making legal and historical structures feel like stories rather than catalogs. He treated Harry as an intellectual equal with a great deal to learn, which was exactly the right approach. The combat instructor, retired Auror, as Augusta had promised, was a stocky, grey-haired woman named Petra Holt who showed up on the first morning with a practice wand and no preamble. "You don't have a wand," she said. "Not yet," Harry said. "That's priority one," Petra said. "You can learn the theory of every spell in the book, but until you have a wand you can't do anything useful." She looked at him assessingly. "We'll go to Ollivander's this week." In the meantime, she pulled out a flat, smooth stone and placed it on the garden table between them. "Move that." Harry looked at it. "Without a wand?" "Without a wand," Petra confirmed. Harry looked at the stone. He thought about the warmth in the manor's floors when he'd crossed the threshold, the way the door had opened before he touched it. He thought about the time he'd been on the roof of his primary school without quite understanding how he'd gotten there, and the time he'd made Dudley's hair grow, and all the other small things that had happened around him for as long as he could remember and that nobody had ever explained. He looked at the stone and did the thing he'd always done when those things happened, let it happen instead of stopping it. The stone moved. Not far, 3 inches, maybe 4, but it scraped across the table with a clean, deliberate sound. Petra looked at it. Then at Harry. "Good," she said, with the brisk satisfaction of someone whose assessment had been confirmed. "Very good. Now do it with intention." Harry did it again, and the stone moved further. "We're going to have an interesting 6 months, Petra said. The wand found him at Ollivander's on a Friday morning. The shop was exactly as strange as Harry had expected, floor-to-ceiling boxes, dust, a sense of accumulated significance, and Ollivander himself moving between the shelves with the particular quality of someone who was never quite as absent as they seemed. He measured Harry's arm span, his wand hand, the distance between his nose and his left shoulder, which Harry suspected was at least partly theatrical. The first 12 wands did nothing interesting. The 13th was holly and phoenix feather, 11 inches, and the moment Harry wrapped his fingers around it the shop filled with a warm rush of golden sparks, not showy, just clean and bright, like the first breath after a long time underwater. Ollivander stood very still. "Curious," he said, and his pale eyes were very focused. "Very curious." "I've heard that's a particular wand," Harry said. Ollivander looked at him. "The phoenix who gave that feather gave only one other. The wand that gave you that scar." He said it matter-of-factly, the way he might have said that 2 swords were forged from the same iron. "Connected, you and it. Is that a problem?" Harry asked. Ollivander seemed to consider whether it was. "That depends," he said slowly, "entirely on you." He looked at the wand in Harry's hand and then back at his face. "How you grow, what you become, what you choose." A pause. "I've sold many wands in 80 years. I've never sold one like that twice." Harry looked at the wand. The golden sparks had faded but there was still warmth in the wood, a responsiveness that felt less like a tool and more like an agreement. He thought of the stone on the garden table, moving 3 inches without it. With it in his hand, he felt the difference, like the difference between speaking quietly and speaking with a clear voice in a room that was built for it. "I'll take it," Harry said. He paid, the price was unremarkable, which he found faintly comic given the week he'd had, and walked out into Diagon Alley with the wand in his pocket and Neville beside him, who had come along on the grounds that moral support required physical presence. "How does it feel?" Neville asked. Harry thought about it. "Like the difference between reading about something and doing it," he said. Neville nodded, understanding this completely. He was, Harry had learned, a boy who often understood things better than he articulated them, and who had a particular gift for just being present in the right way at the right moment. He didn't always say the useful thing. He was usually just there when it mattered, which Harry had decided was worth more than most people's eloquence. The Board of Governors meeting fell on a clear September morning with the smell of autumn beginning to get into the air. They traveled to Hogwarts by Flo, Harry's first experience of it, which he managed without embarrassing himself, mainly because Petra had made him practice falling sideways repeatedly in the garden, and he'd understood, belatedly, that this was why, and arrived in a ground-floor office that Harry had never seen before, brushing ash off his robes with the brisk efficiency of someone pretending flu travel was fine. Neville was not with him. Augusta was. Castleton was. And Ragnarok, who had come personally because, as he'd put it, some meetings required a goblin to be physically present to ensure the paperwork remained honest. McGonagall met them in the corridor. She was exactly what her letter had suggested, brisk, precise, and somehow conveying warmth without being warm in any soft sense. She shook Harry's hand with a firm grip and held it for a moment, looking at him directly, and her eyes behind her square spectacles were sharp and kind and complicated all at once. "Lord Potter Peverell," she said. "I'm very glad to meet you." "Professor McGonagall," Harry said. "Likewise. Your letter was, I appreciated it." She gave a brief nod, accepting this without elaboration. "The board is assembled in the main conference chamber. I should warn you, Lucius Malfoy arrived 40 minutes early." She said this in a tone that conveyed everything necessary about the quality of those 40 minutes. "Good," Harry said. "I like knowing where the opposition is." McGonagall looked at him. Then at Augusta. Then back at Harry. "Well," she said, with the restraint of someone suppressing a stronger reaction. "Right. This way." The conference chamber was high-ceilinged, stone-walled, hung with portraits of former headmasters and headmistresses who were all conspicuously awake and watching with unconcealed interest. The board sat around a long table, 12 of them, as Harry had prepared for, and he placed names against faces with the methodical speed of someone who had spent 3 evenings memorizing profiles. Lucius Malfoy was at the far end, blond and composed and wearing the particular expression of someone who had arranged things to their advantage and was waiting to see if anyone noticed. He noticed Harry notice him, and his expression didn't change, but something behind it sharpened. Harry sat in the chair at the head of the table, the Peverell Charter seat, which had apparently been historically at the head and which no one had challenged, because the alternative was a legal discussion that none of them wanted to start. Augusta sat to his right. Castleton to his left. Ragnarok at the end, across from Malfoy, and the two of them looked at each other across the length of the table with the particular quality of two very old, very experienced opponents who had been in rooms like this before. The chair of the board, a witch named Vivian Bones, Amelia's cousin, sharp and fair, called the meeting to order. "The primary business of this session," she said, "is the formal activation of the Peverell Charter seat and the introduction of Lord Potter Peverell to the board." She looked at Harry. "Lord Potter Peverell, would you like to introduce yourself?" "Briefly," Harry said. "I'm 8. I own the foundational land this school is built on. I intend to be a student here in 3 years, and a stakeholder in its governance until I'm very old." He looked around the table, not performing, just clear. "I don't plan to involve myself in day-to-day operations. I do plan to be informed about significant decisions, particularly those affecting school policy, staff appointments, and the school's financial governance." A pause. "I've reviewed the board's records for the past 7 years. I have questions, but those can wait for the regular agenda." A very brief silence. Lucius Malfoy spoke. His voice was measured, pleasant, and precisely calibrated. "The board welcomes Lord Potter Peverell, of course. Though I would observe that the charter seat's activation, while technically valid, raises questions about precedent, specifically, whether a minor, the charter doesn't specify age," Castleton said, "should be exercising governance rights over an institution he hasn't yet attended," Malfoy continued, as if Castleton hadn't spoken. "It might be more appropriate for the charter rights to be exercised by a designated adult representative. The charter rights are mine," Harry said pleasantly. "Not my representative's. I'm happy to have Augusta Longbottom present for administrative formality, but the vote is mine." He looked at Malfoy without hostility and without flinching. "Was there a specific decision you were hoping I wouldn't vote on, Mr. Malfoy?" A very careful silence. Vivian Bones looked like she was working extremely hard to maintain a neutral expression. Malfoy looked at Harry. His composure was excellent, really excellent, but Harry had been watching for the tell he'd seen in their previous correspondence, the slight tension around the jaw when a line of approach wasn't landing the way it had been planned to land. There it was. Not at all, Malfoy said smoothly. Merely raising procedural concerns. Noted, Harry said. Shall we continue? They moved through the agenda: school budget review, a staffing matter concerning the defense against the dark arts position that had apparently been a revolving door of appointments for years, a proposal about curriculum changes that Harry asked 3 specific questions about, each of which Vivian Bones answered with increasing surprise. The staffing question interested him. The defense position had been filled by a new appointment each year for the past decade, which was inefficient and disruptive and which, from the discussion, appeared to stem at least partly from a persistent rumor that the position was cursed. Who manages the hiring for this position? Harry asked. Historically the headmaster, Vivian Bones said. Albus Dumbledore has final approval on all staffing appointments. Harry filed that away and said nothing further about it. Not the moment. But he noted it. After the meeting, when the other governors had filtered out in 1s and 2s, Lucius Malfoy came and stood beside Harry at the window. Below, the grounds of Hogwarts stretched out in the autumn sun, the lake, the forbidden forest, the stone paths between buildings. It was the first time Harry had seen the school properly, and it was exactly and nothing like what he'd imagined. Lord Potter Peverell, Malfoy said, quietly, not quite private but not addressed to the room. I underestimated you. I'm 8, Harry said. Most people do. I won't make that mistake twice. Good, Harry said. He turned from the window to look at Malfoy directly. Your wife and I had a productive conversation. Something shifted in Malfoy's expression, not quite surprise, but a recalibration. She told me. The arrangement I proposed is fair, Harry said. Better than the alternative. I think you know that. Malfoy looked at him for a long moment. He was, Harry thought, a man who had spent his entire life operating through hierarchy and connection and the careful cultivation of obligation, who had never had to deal with someone who was both his legal superior in property and too young for social intimidation to work on. It was a genuinely new experience for him. I'll review the proposed terms, Malfoy said. Tell me one thing, Harry said. Malfoy waited. Voldemort, Harry said, quietly, and watched Malfoy's face. What do you think happens when he comes back? The reaction was fractional, a very brief, very well-controlled stillness, the kind that came from genuinely not knowing what to do with a question. A pause. The general view is that he is gone. The general view is wrong, Harry said simply. He'll come back. I want to know where people stand before that happens, not after. He held Malfoy's gaze. You have time to make sensible decisions. That window won't be open forever. He left Malfoy by the window and walked back toward where Augusta was waiting near the door, and he didn't look back. In the corridor, McGonagall fell into step beside him. I've been at this school for 30 years, she said, in a conversational tone that somehow managed to convey that she was saying something significant. I have seen a great many remarkable students. Harry waited. You're not a student yet, she said. You're something slightly different. She glanced at him sidelong. I wanted you to know that when you do come to Hogwarts, in whatever capacity, under whatever circumstances, you will have allies here. A pause. Not because of your name or your title. Because I am not in the habit of watching children be failed by the people who were supposed to look after them and then pretending it didn't happen. Harry stopped walking. She stopped too. I'm not asking for anything from you in return for saying that, McGonagall said, with a briskness that was also, somehow, completely genuine. I just wanted it said. Harry looked at her. Thank you, Professor. She said, which appeared to be her version of you're welcome, and resumed walking. Your parents would have been proud, for what it's worth. Your mother would have found all of this fascinating and your father would have been insufferable about it. Harry laughed, that sudden, surprised, real laugh. That's the best thing anyone's told me this month. McGonagall didn't laugh, but her eyes did. They came home on the evening Flo and Harry sat in the Longbottom House sitting room with Neville, who had been vibrating with barely contained curiosity since they'd returned, and told him everything. Neville listened with his feet tucked up under him on the old armchair, eating biscuits Augusta had left, and when Harry finished he was quiet for a moment. So Malfoy didn't fight it, Neville said. Not directly. He'll review the terms, which means Narcissa's already told him to accept. And McGonagall, Neville looked thoughtful. She's really on your side? I think she's on the side of things being right, Harry said. Which happens to align with my side at the moment. He leaned back on the sofa. There was something in that room today, Neville. The way the board reacted, most of them don't actually know what they want from Hogwarts. They're just managing existing positions. No one's been asking what the school is for in a long time. What is it for? Neville asked. Teaching people magic properly, Harry said, as if it were obvious and also somehow as if it were a revolutionary idea. Making sure every student who comes through gets a real education and a real chance. He paused. That's not what it's been doing. The curriculum is decades out of date. The defense position is a joke. Half the board treats it like a social club. He picked up a biscuit. I want to change that. Neville looked at him. You're 8, he said. Not a challenge, more like he was checking that Harry knew this. Yes, Harry said. I'll be 11 in 3 years. I'd like a head start. Neville was quiet for a moment. Can I be involved, he said. In whatever you're building. Not just, watching from the side. Actually involved. Harry looked at him. Neville was not performing confidence. He was offering something genuine, and the slight uncertainty in his face was not doubt about wanting it, it was the particular anxiety of someone asking for a thing they actually care about. You were involved from day 2, Harry said. When you came to Gringotts with me and sat in the meeting and asked the right question about the ward anchor at exactly the right moment. Neville blinked. I didn't think it was useful, Harry said firmly. You're going to be useful in a lot of ways. You know plants, you know people, you're honest, and you're a great deal sharper than you think you are. He looked at Neville directly. Stop waiting for me to give you permission to be involved. You already are. Neville stared at him for a moment. Then he looked away at the fire, and the expression on his face was the quiet kind of thing that doesn't get said out loud. Outside, the autumn evening settled over the countryside, and somewhere in Scotland the lights of Hogwarts reflected in the dark lake, and Harry thought about what it meant to walk into that school in 3 years, not as a scared 11-year-old who didn't know his own name, but as exactly who he already was. He thought that was probably going to be interesting. Chapter 4, The board 3 years moved differently than Harry expected. Not slowly, nothing about the years between 8 and 11 was slow. They were dense, packed with the particular quality of time that's being used rather than spent. Tutors, ledgers, board meetings, property visits, legal proceedings that wound through Gringotts Heritage Court with the grinding patience of institutional machinery doing what it was built to do. Potter Manor came back to life room by room, the library first, then the residential wing, then the greenhouses that Neville essentially claimed as a personal project and which became, over 18 months, something genuinely extraordinary. Harry grew. Not just physically, though he did, steadily, filling out the undersized frame that 7 years of Dursley hospitality had left him with. He grew into himself, which was a different and more important thing. The steadiness that had always been there, that quiet, unblinking quality that made adults uncertain, deepened into something with more weight behind it. Not coldness. Harry was not cold. He laughed easily, argued readily, was fiercely loyal to about 4 people and genuinely indifferent to the opinions of everyone else. But there was a gravity to him now, something that came from knowing exactly who he was and having built that knowledge through work rather than inheritance. Petra Holt said, at the end of his second year of training, that she'd taught Aurors with less natural command of defensive casting. She said it in the same tone she said everything, brisk, clinical, not coddling, which made it mean more than praise from someone who gave it freely. Dorcas Vane said his theoretical understanding had outpaced her prepared curriculum and she was going to have to actually think about what to teach him next, which she clearly found irritating and satisfying in equal measure. Phineas Ardmore said nothing for a long time, and then one afternoon in the middle of a tutorial on Wizarding procedural history he stopped mid-sentence and said, "You know, I think you may end up running that body someday," in a tone that suggested he wasn't entirely sure how he felt about it. The Heritage Court proceedings concluded 14 months after they'd begun. The ruling was comprehensive: executor authority revoked, Dumbledore ordered to submit full accounting of all estate income collected and disbursed, recovery proceedings for unauthorized expenditure to be managed through a joint Gringotts-Wizarding financial oversight panel. The total sum to be recovered was very large. Dumbledore, through his solicitors, acknowledged the ruling without appeal. He had sent Harry one more personal letter during the proceedings, brief, this time, with none of the warmth of the earlier ones. Just 3 lines: "I understand that I cannot undo what was done. I hope that you will one day understand that it was done for reasons I believed were right. Whatever happens, I will not be your enemy." Harry read it, thought about it for a day, and wrote back 2 lines, "I understand more than you think. I will not be yours either." They didn't correspond again, but something had been set down between them, not forgiveness, not exactly, but something cleaner than ongoing hostility. A recognition. 2 people who understood each other and were going to be careful around that understanding. The summer before Hogwarts, Harry turned 11 in Potter Manor. Augusta and Neville came. Ragnarok came, which Harry hadn't expected and was oddly moved by. Castleton came with his wife. Petra came and tried to be gruff about it and mostly succeeded. McGonagall sent a gift, a book on advanced transfiguration theory with a note that said simply, "You'll need this." McGonagall. Narcissa Malfoy sent a formal gift accompanied by a note in her precise handwriting that, over 3 years of careful, occasional correspondence, had become something Harry trusted, which was not a word he used casually. It was the best birthday he'd ever had, which was also the first real birthday he'd ever had, and he sat in the great restored dining room of Potter Manor surrounded by the small number of people he had chosen and felt, for the first time in his memory, entirely in the right place. Neville gave him a plant. Not just a plant, a cutting from a species that Neville had spent 8 months identifying through the Manor's greenhouse collection, a rare Peverellera cultivar that had properties no contemporary herbology text had fully catalogued, that Neville had painstakingly propagated and now presented in a small terracotta pot with a look of intense, barely contained pride. "You don't have to pretend to know what it is," Neville said. "I don't know what it is," Harry said. "Tell me." Neville told him, at length, and Harry listened, and this was one of the things nobody outside their friendship ever quite understood about it, that Harry listened to Neville the way he listened to Ragnarok reading inheritance law, with the full focused attention of someone who believed that the person talking knew something worth knowing. "It's brilliant," Harry said, when Neville finished. "It is, a bit," Neville said, with the same carefully suppressed delight he always had when something he cared about turned out to be genuinely good. The Hogwarts letter arrived 3 days later. Standard format, standard owl, as if Harry was any other 11-year-old awaiting their invitation. He opened it at breakfast and read it and set it down and picked up his tea. "Well?" Neville said. He was leaving for Hogwarts himself in 2 months, had received his own letter already, had read it approximately 7 times. "Says I need a cauldron," Harry said. And a wand, which I already have. And robes, which I already have better versions of." He put the letter down. "Also, my Hogwarts letter addressed me as Mr. Potter." Neville absorbed this. "Not Lord Potter Peverell." "No." Harry looked at the letter. "I think that's interesting." "Deliberate?" "Almost certainly not," Harry said. Just the standard form letter template. But it's a choice I get to make, whether I walk in as Harry Potter, which everyone knows, or as Lord Potter Peveril, which has a different weight. He turned the letter over. I haven't decided yet. What's the difference? Harry thought about it. Lord Potter Peveril walks in as a political figure. Harry Potter walks in as a student. He picked up the letter again. I want to be both. I want to be properly both. Not one as a cover for the other. Neville nodded slowly. Can you be both? At school? Without one getting in the way of the other? I'm going to find out, Harry said. September 1st was grey and cool and smelled of autumn in a way that made the King's Cross platform feel more significant than it probably was. Harry stood on the platform with Augusta, who had come to see him off with the particular focused emotion of someone who had decided they were not going to make a scene about it and was succeeding through sheer force of personality. She'd given him a long list of people to watch out for, advice about professors, 3 firm handshakes worth of things about representing yourself properly, and 1 brief, startling hug that lasted exactly 2 seconds and conveyed considerably more than that. Right, she said. Yes, Harry said. Weakly, not when you remember to. Yes, Augusta. And eat properly. You have an elf at the manor, but at school you eat what they serve and you eat enough of it. Augusta. I'm going, she said, and walked away at a brisk clip, and Harry watched her go with something warm and complicated in his chest. He found Neville in the second carriage from the front, sitting with his toad Trevor in his lap and an expression of mild anxiety that transformed into relief when Harry appeared in the compartment doorway. I've already lost Trevor twice since King's Cross, Neville said. He's in your lap, Harry said, sitting down across from him. I lost him, found him, lost him, found him, Neville clarified. He was under the seat. Put him in the box. He hates the box. Neville. Neville put Trevor in the box. The toad made a sound of dignified protest. Harry pulled a book from his bag, not a textbook, one of the Peveril-era private journals from the manor library that he'd been working through systematically for the past year, and opened it. The train moved. The platform slid away. London opened up outside the windows and then gave way to countryside, and Harry read and Neville watched the scenery, and it was comfortable in the specific way that things were comfortable between them, which was that silences didn't need filling. The compartment door slid open. A girl peered in, bushy brown hair, bright eyes, the kind of focused energy that was immediately recognizable to Harry as someone who had spent a lot of time reading. She looked between them with the quick assessment of someone who did not intend to sit in a compartment with strangers if she could help it but was evaluating the risk. Have you seen a toad? She said. A boy named Neville is looking for. She stopped. Oh. You are Neville. Yes, Neville said. Trevor's in his box. Oh, good. She didn't leave. She appeared to be reconsidering. I'm Hermione Granger. I've read all our textbooks already, have you? I found the theory of transfiguration in Hardwick's introduction particularly interesting, though I think the chapter on switching spells skips too quickly over the foundational principles. Come in, Harry said, without looking up from his book. She came in and sat beside Neville, and then looked at what Harry was reading, handwritten, old, in an archaic script, and her eyes sharpened with something very like the expression Harry wore when something was interesting. What is that? She said. Private journal, Harry said. Peveril-era. Written in Middle Magical English with some archaic notation I've been working through. He turned a page. The theory of intent-based casting is different in pre-ministry sources. The contemporary curriculum skips the historical underpinning. Hermione Granger looked at him the way she probably looked at very few things in the world, like she'd met something she hadn't entirely expected. I didn't know Peveril-era primary sources were available. They're not, generally, Harry said. They're in a private library. He looked up for the first time. Harry Potter. She blinked. The way everyone blinked, but briefer, she moved past it faster than most. I know who you are, she said. There's been a great deal in the Prophet. A pause. I think what you did with the Gringotts proceedings was remarkable. I had help, Harry said. Ragnarok did most of the actual legal architecture. Yes, but you were 8, she said, with the particular emphasis of someone who had been processing this for some time and had feelings about it. I had access to ledgers, Harry said, which was becoming something of a personal motto. Hermione looked at him for a moment longer, then at the book, then back at him. Can I see? She said, and it wasn't performed casualness, it was genuine, slightly hungry, barely restrained. Harry handed her the book. She read the page he was on, eyebrows drawing together, lips moving very slightly. Then she turned back 2 pages and read those. Then she looked up. This says that wand-mediated casting is a refinement of pre-wand technique, not the origin of it. That the pre-wand method is actually more direct, yes, Harry said. That's not in any published source I've found. No, Harry said. Which is interesting. Hermione handed the book back with an expression of intense intellectual frustration at the universe for not having given her access to this earlier. I would very much like to read that when you're done, she said. I'll lend it, Harry said. I want notes, though. You read faster than me, probably, and 2 sets of notes are better than 1. She looked at him with an expression he recognized. It was the expression Neville had worn in the greenhouse when Harry had asked him to explain the Puffapod, the expression of someone being asked to contribute something they actually know and being slightly startled that someone wants it. Deal, Hermione said, and settled back in her seat with the focused satisfaction of someone who had found a compartment worth staying in. Hogwarts was, in person, everything and exactly itself. Harry had seen it from the board chamber, and he'd seen photographs, and he'd built a mental model from the charter documents which described it with architectural precision, but none of that was the same as the boats crossing the Black Lake in the dark with the castle blazing above them, reflected in the water below, ancient and enormous and alive in a way stone usually wasn't. Beside Harry, Neville had gone very still, looking up at it. Yeah, Harry said. Yeah, Neville agreed. They were sorted in a hall lit by 1,000 candles, the enchanted ceiling showing a heavy autumn sky. The students went up one by one, sat on the stool, wore the old hat, and were directed to their tables with the usual mixture of relief and disappointment. Harry watched each sorting with methodical attention, fitting names to faces he'd researched, noting who sat where, who looked at whom and with what expression. The Weasley twins went to Gryffindor in quick succession and immediately started talking to each other before they'd properly sat down. A pale boy named Draco Malfoy went to Slytherin and, in doing so, briefly met Harry's eyes across the hall with his mother's composure and his father's calculation in a face that was still too young to know how to wear either properly. Harry gave him a brief, neutral nod. Draco held it for a beat, then looked away first. Harry Potter. The hall went quiet the way it always did at that name, that particular quality of silence that was actually the sound of several hundred people paying attention at once. Harry walked up to the stool. The hat dropped over his eyes and he was in the particular darkness of something very old examining you. Well, said a voice that was dry and curious and ancient. This is not what I expected. What did you expect? Harry said. What most of them bring, the hat said. Fear. Ambition. Hope. You have some of all of those, but they're not the dominant note. A pause. What you have, mostly, is clarity. I don't see that often. Another pause. You could go anywhere, you know. There's enough of each founder's quality here to make a genuine argument for any house. I know, Harry said. Where do you think I should go? The hat seemed surprised at being asked directly. Most people either accept my judgment or argue with it. You're the first in some years who asked. You've been doing this for 1,000 years, Harry said. Your opinion is worth having. A long pause, and then something in the hat's examination shifted, like a door opening. Gryffindor, it said, and its tone had something in it that Harry couldn't quite identify. Satisfaction, maybe. Or recognition. Not because your bravery is greatest, though it's considerable. Because you've already decided to walk into everything that's coming with your eyes open, and that is the most Gryffindor thing I've seen in a long time. Gryffindor, the hat announced to the hall. The Gryffindor table erupted. Harry took the hat off, handed it back to McGonagall, who gave him a brisk nod that had considerable warmth packed into it, and walked to the Gryffindor table where he sat beside a red-haired girl named Ginny Weasley's older brother, who introduced himself as Percy, and across from the twins, who greeted him with the synchronized energy of people who had already decided they liked him. Harry Potter, said one of them. Fred, Harry thought, or George, he'd sort it out, we've heard quite a lot about you. Good things, I hope, Harry said. Extraordinary things, the other one said. The Gringotts business. The Malfoy thing. The board seat. He leaned forward. You're 8, 11, same energy, and you've already run circles around half the most powerful people in Britain. 3 years of preparation, Harry said. Still, Fred said, and looked at George, and something passed between them that Harry recognized as two people who have decided they're going to be useful to someone. We've been looking for someone with actual pull to help with a certain project. No, Harry said. You don't know what it is, you've been planning something disruptive since before you got on the train, Harry said. I noticed you both looking at the staff table with that particular expression when we came in. Whatever it is, not tonight. He paused. Come find me tomorrow, in daylight, and tell me the actual plan. They stared at him. Then Fred said to George, I like him. Yes, George agreed. So do I. He met Quirrell at the welcome feast. The defense against the dark arts professor was thin, nervous, with a stutter that Harry clocked within 30 seconds as inconsistent, present in some sentences, absent in others, dropping away when Quirrell forgot to maintain it and returning when he remembered. Harry sat at the Gryffindor table and ate and watched him with the particular attention he gave to things that didn't quite fit the pattern. Something was wrong with Quirrell. Not wrong in the sense of illness or anxiety, wrong in a deeper sense. A quality about him that Harry couldn't articulate precisely but felt the way you felt a cold draft in a warm room, not seeing the source but knowing it was there. After the feast, walking up to Gryffindor Tower with Neville and Hermione, she'd been sorted to Gryffindor as well, with a hat deliberation time of under 30 seconds, which she seemed both pleased and slightly insulted by. Harry said, quietly, what do you know about the defense professor? Quirinus Quirrell, Hermione said immediately. Graduated Hogwarts 1974, academically strong, served as Muggle Studies professor for several years before transitioning to defense. Took a sabbatical the year before last, supposedly to study firsthand in various locations. She paused. There was a theory in one of the secondary texts I read that his sabbatical involved him investigating rumors of a dark artifact in Eastern Europe. What kind of artifact? Harry said. The text wasn't specific, Hermione said. It was fairly fringe material, actually. I almost didn't read it. What was the artifact linked to? She looked at him. It wasn't explicit. But the region mentioned was Albania. A pause. Which is where most of the rumors about Voldemort's disembodied form have been localized. Harry nodded once and looked ahead. The moving staircases shifted around them with the groaning patience of something old and very used to students who didn't know where they were going. I want to talk to Ragnarok, Harry said. Can we arrange a fire call this week? The common room has a fire, Neville said. Though I don't know if there's a Flug connection, there's a separate Flug connection in the prefect's bathroom on the 3rd floor, Harry said. Augusta told me. The old head students used it for correspondence. Neville and Hermione both looked at him. Augusta's very thorough, Harry said. He was in Quirrell's company twice in the first week, once in class, once at a faculty dinner that first-year students were apparently traditionally invited to attend, a detail Harry suspected had something to do with Dumbledore wanting a more careful look at him. Dumbledore was there. This was their second meeting in person, and it was different from the first. The conference room formality was gone, replaced by the complex social architecture of a dinner table, which was a different kind of stage. Dumbledore looked well. Still impressive, still warm, the half-moon glasses and the silver beard and the robes that were, tonight, deep amber. He looked at Harry across the table with an expression that was careful and genuine and complicated all at once, and Harry looked back the same way. "Harry," Dumbledore said, settling on the given name with the deliberate quality of someone making a choice. "Headmaster," Harry said, settling on the title with the equally deliberate quality of someone accepting the choice while also defining the relationship. Something almost amused moved through Dumbledore's expression. "I hear your first week has been eventful." "It's been fine," Harry said. "The curriculum is less advanced than I'd hoped in some areas. I'll supplement from my own library." "The library here is quite extensive," Dumbledore said. "Yes, I know. I've already been through the restricted section." He watched Dumbledore absorb this. Madame Pants was helpful. "The Peveril Charter access rights apply to the school library as well as the governance structures. She checked with your office." A brief pause. "Yes," Dumbledore said. "She did." "The defense curriculum concerns me," Harry said. "First-year theory is 30 years out of date. I'd like to propose a supplementary reading list. I'll share it with Professor Quirrell." Across the table, Quirrell had gone very still. Harry looked at him. Quirrell's expression was the right expression, mild interest, slight deference, but underneath it, just briefly, something looked back at Harry from behind those eyes that was not Quirrell's anxiety and was not Quirrell's deference and was not, Harry thought, Quirrell at all. Harry kept his face perfectly neutral. "Of course," Quirrell said, with his inconsistent stutter very much present. "Any suggestions from Lord Potter Peveril would be most welcome." "Wonderful," Harry said, and smiled, and moved the conversation elsewhere. Under the table his fingers rested on his wand and he noted, with the methodical precision of someone cataloging information, that the cold draft feeling was considerably stronger in Quirrell's direct presence. Like standing next to a door that had something very dark on the other side. After dinner, walking back through the corridor, Neville fell into step beside him. Hermione was on his other side. Neither of them spoke until they were around a corner and the noise of the faculty dinner had faded. "Quirrell," Neville said quietly. "Yes," Harry said. "You felt it too." "There's something on him," Harry said. "Or in him." He paused. "I want you both to do something for me. Don't be alone with him. And if he ever asks either of you about me, what I'm working on, what I know, anything, tell me immediately." Hermione had her thinking expression. "You believe he's compromised." "I believe something is wrong with him that isn't simple," Harry said. "Until I know what it is, I'm treating him as a variable." He looked between them. "That doesn't mean panic or confrontation. Just awareness." "What are you going to do?" Neville asked. "Talk to Ragnarok," Harry said. "And do some reading." He said it calmly, the way he said most things, but Hermione was watching him with the focused attention she gave to things that were actually significant, and she said, "You already have a theory." "I have a hypothesis," Harry said. "I want evidence before I call it a theory." "What's the hypothesis?" Harry was quiet for a moment, thinking of cold drafts and misaligned stutters and a question Dumbledore had asked him at the second-to-last board meeting. "Is there anything at Hogwarts you're particularly concerned about, Harry? Anything I should know?" Said in a warm and genuine voice by a man who was, Harry had come to understand, almost always asking two questions at once. "The thing everyone said was gone," Harry said. "Isn't." He made the fire call to Ragnarok on Thursday evening, in the prefect's bathroom, with Hermione standing at the door doing a very convincing impression of someone just happening to be in the corridor. Ragnarok's face in the green flames had its usual quality of carved granite, but his eyes sharpened immediately at what Harry told him. "You believe Voldemort is attached to Quirrell," Ragnarok said. "I believe something significant is attached to Quirrell," Harry said. "The feeling is consistent with the accounts of dark entity presence in the Peveril journals. There's a specific sensation described, cold in warm spaces, wrongness in a familiar context, that aligns with what I've been noticing. And Dumbledore? Ragnock said. Knows, Harry said. Or suspects. He's been watching Quirrell too. I've seen the way he looks at him. A pause. There's something in this school Voldemort wants. Something Dumbledore is protecting. Ragnock was quiet for a moment. The Philosopher's Stone, he said. Harry had not expected that. What? Gringotts moved an object from Vault 713 to Hogwarts in late July, Ragnock said carefully. I was not, personally, involved in that transaction. But I am aware of it. He looked at Harry through the flames. I can tell you that Vault 713 belonged to a very old account, and that the object moved was of significant magical importance. Significant enough for Voldemort to want it, Harry said. Yes. Harry thought about this. In Hogwarts, somewhere, there was an object with enough power to draw a being who had survived death clinging to the back of a professor's head. And Dumbledore knew, and Quirrell knew, and now Harry knew. What do you want to do? Ragnock asked. I want to find it before Quirrell does, Harry said. Ragnock looked at him steadily. You're 11 years old and you've been at school for 3 days. Yes, Harry said. And Voldemort's been planning this considerably longer. So let's not wait. He met Ragnock's eyes through the flames. I have access to the restricted section and 3 years of preparation and the best notes on pre-ministry ward theory outside the ministry's own archive. A pause. I'll be careful. Being careful, Ragnock said, and walking toward the thing everyone else is running from are not the same thing. No, Harry agreed. But I'm not running from anything. Ragnock looked at him for a long moment. The fire crackled. Somewhere in Gringotts, the old machinery of wealth and record-keeping went on its patient rounds. Keep me informed, the Goblin said. Daily if necessary. Daily, Harry agreed. He stepped back from the fire and walked back out into the corridor where Hermione was waiting, her arms folded, her expression set in the particular way she had when she was trying to decide how alarmed to be and hadn't finished deciding yet. Well, she said. There's something in this school, Harry said. Something powerful. Voldemort wants it and Dumbledore is guarding it and we're going to figure out what it is and where it is before anyone does anything irreversible. Hermione looked at him. She said. Not a question, a check. Unless you'd rather not, Harry said. She thought about it for approximately 1 second. No, she said. Let's go. They walked back toward Gryffindor Tower, and the castle moved around them with its ancient, complicated awareness, and somewhere above them in the school a man with something terrible living behind his eyes was planning, and somewhere else in the same building an old man with half-moon spectacles was watching a game board he'd been arranging for 30 years. Harry climbed the stairs and thought that the interesting thing about game boards was that they only worked if all the pieces behaved as expected. He didn't intend to behave as expected. He never had. Chapter 5. The war beneath October brought rain and Quidditch tryouts and the discovery that someone had been trying to get through the third-floor corridor. Harry found out about the third-floor corridor the way he found out about most things, not from being told, but from paying attention. Dumbledore had forbidden the corridor at the opening feast, which was the kind of prohibition that told you more about what was there than any description would have. Harry had filed it away, noted the location on the mental map he'd built from the charter documents, and spent the first 3 weeks of term approaching it from every adjacent angle without going near it directly. What he found, through oblique investigation and the particular trick of listening to how people talked about spaces they were nervous around, was that the corridor had something living in it. Something large. Something that had reportedly made a sound, once, that a 7th-year prefect described as, not like any dog I've ever heard, more like all of them at once. Cerberus, Harry thought, and went back to the Peveril Library notes. He'd brought 6 boxes of copied documents from the Manor Library. Hermione had helped him categorize them over the summer into relevant sections, which she'd done with the focused enthusiasm of someone who had found a project equal to her organizational capabilities. The section on ancient creature bindings and guard wards was in box 4, and Harry worked through it on 3 consecutive evenings while Neville read over his shoulder and occasionally contributed something useful from his herbology knowledge when the texts crossed into magical plant theory. "Fluffy," Neville said suddenly, on the 3rd evening. Harry looked up. "What?" "I heard Hagrid call it Fluffy. I was near the groundskeeper's hut last week looking at the pumpkins. He's got extraordinary pumpkins. Actually, I want to ask him about the fertilizer, and I heard him talking to someone, I think it was Professor Sprout, and he said something about Fluffy being settled." "Hagrid has a 3-headed dog called Fluffy," Harry said. "Apparently." Harry closed his notebook. "Hagrid brought it here to guard whatever's in the corridor," Hermione said, not looking up from the text she was cross-referencing. "Which Dumbledore arranged. Which means the object's security involves at least one layer of creature-based protection and presumably additional enchantments beneath." She looked up. "It's a gauntlet. Dumbledore's very good at those," Harry said. "He designed it to stop Voldemort," Neville said. "Or Quirrell. So the challenges would have to be defeatable by someone who knew what they were doing," Harry said. "But not trivial." He picked up his quill. "What stops a Cerberus?" Neville brightened slightly. "Music. According to Fantastic Beasts and several classical sources, a Cerberus can be put to sleep with music. Orpheus used a lyre in the original Greek myth, but magical theory suggests any sustained harmonic will work." "Of course you know that," Harry said. "I read a lot," Neville said, with dignity. Hermione was already writing. "So the first layer is the dog. Then there'd be something below. Enchantments, creature-based traps, logic puzzles." She paused. "I could design something for the logic section if I knew what they were protecting." "Philosopher's Stone," Harry said. Both of them looked at him. He'd been waiting for the right moment to say it. Not deliberately dramatic, he just hadn't had confirmation until the Ragnarok fire call, and he'd wanted the information solid before he shared it. "Nicholas Flamel," he said. "Alchemist. 600 years old, roughly. The stone grants immortality and the ability to transmute base metals to gold. Flamel's the only person in modern history to have created one." He paused. "It was moved from Gringotts to Hogwarts in July. Whatever's under the 3rd floor, it ends with the stone." Hermione had gone very still with the pen halfway to the page. "And Quirrell, Voldemort, wants it for immortality." "Voldemort already has a kind of immortality," Harry said. "What he wants is a body. The stone can provide that." He looked at the corridor notes. "The question isn't whether he'll try to get it. It's when." "Halloween," Neville said quietly. Harry and Hermione both looked at him. Neville was looking at the table, turning something over. "I was just thinking. Halloween it's when things happened before. When Voldemort," he stopped. "I know that's not exactly analysis. Actually," Harry said slowly, "it might be." He thought about dark calendars, about the significance of dates in pre-ministry magical tradition, about the Peveril journal entries that described certain days as having thinner barriers between the living and the dead. There's a reason dark magic spikes around Halloween in the historical records. It's not just superstition. The veil is genuinely thinner. A possession, which is what I think is happening to Quirrell, would be at maximum strength on a day like that." A pause. "That's in 3 weeks, Hermione said. 3 weeks, Harry agreed. He went to see Dumbledore the next morning. Not to tell him everything, not yet. He wasn't ready for Dumbledore to take over the situation, and he knew that was exactly what Dumbledore would do, with the best of intentions and his own specific idea of how things should unfold. What Harry wanted was information, and he intended to get it by being direct about wanting it. Dumbledore's office was everything the man himself suggested, a circular tower room full of spinning instruments that hummed and clicked, portraits of former headmasters sleeping or pretending to, a perch where a magnificent phoenix was watching Harry with amber eyes not unlike Ragnar's. The phoenix tilted its head. "Hello," Harry said to it. The phoenix made a soft sound, almost musical, and rustled its feathers. "Ah," Dumbledore said, from behind his desk, watching this exchange with an expression of carefully contained surprise. "Fawkes doesn't usually greet students directly." "I'm not usually a student," Harry said, and sat down in the chair across from the desk. Dumbledore settled. The space between them had evolved, over 3 years and the Heritage Court proceedings and the board meetings, into something that was not warm and not hostile, a kind of careful professional respect between two people who understood each other's capabilities and were navigating accordingly. Dumbledore looked at Harry now with the eyes of someone who had stopped being surprised by him and started being something more complicated. Thoughtful. Perhaps a little wary. "What can I do for you, Harry?" "I want to talk about Professor Quirrell," Harry said. A beat. Very brief, very controlled. "What about him?" "He's compromised," Harry said. "I think you know that. I want to know how far along the situation is, and I want to know what protective measures you have in place below the third-floor corridor." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. "That's a remarkably specific question." "It's a remarkably specific situation," Harry said. "You're 11 years old and you've been at school for 3.5 weeks, Harry said. "And I've been preparing for this for 3 years, roughly." He met Dumbledore's eyes. He was used to Dumbledore's particular quality of gaze, that warm, searching look that most people found comforting and Harry found interesting because it worked whether or not the person behind it wanted it to. "Headmaster. I'm not asking you to let me handle it. I'm asking you to share information so that if something goes wrong, I'm not operating blind." A pause. "Given the last time I was kept ignorant of important information, I'd think you'd understand why I'm asking." That landed. He watched it land, not cruelly, just clearly. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. "The stone is protected by a series of enchantments contributed by several members of staff," he said at last. "Each enchantment designed to test a specific skill, bravery, logic, knowledge, skill. The assumption was that any ordinary dark wizard would be stopped well before reaching the stone." He folded his hands. "I designed the gauntlet on the assumption that the primary threat would be direct." "The threat isn't direct," Harry said. "Voldemort is inside Quirrell. He's had 3 weeks to map the school's defenses from the inside. He's been attending staff meetings." Dumbledore closed his eyes briefly. "Just briefly." "Yes. So some of the people who designed the gauntlet have effectively briefed the person trying to break through it." "That is a possibility I have been," a pause. "Considering." "On Halloween," Harry said. "I think it happens on Halloween." Dumbledore looked at him sharply. "Preministry calendrical theory," Harry said. "The veil's thinner. A possession is stronger. It's the optimal moment." He watched Dumbledore absorb this. "Are you going to be in the school that night?" "I had planned to attend a ministry dinner," Dumbledore said slowly. "Don't," Harry said. A long pause. The spinning instruments clicked and hummed. Fawkes made another soft sound from his perch. "Harry," Dumbledore said, and his voice had dropped the professional register, had become something more direct. "What is it you plan to do?" "Be ready," Harry said. "And stop Quirrell from getting to the stone." He stood up. "I'd also like to know the answer to something you've never directly told me. The protection on the stone, one of the enchantments is a mirror, isn't it? I read about Erased in the Peverell archive. The Desire Mirror. It was used as a protective mechanism in preministry treasure hiding." Dumbledore stared at him. "That's the last line," Harry said. "Anyone who wants to use the stone will see themselves using it, will want to use it, and therefore can't get it. Only someone who wants to find it without using it can." He paused. "Which is why you trust the protection." Because you believe Voldemort can't get past his own desire. Correct, Dumbledore said quietly. It's a good design, Harry said. I just want to make sure someone's there in case the theory has any gaps in practice. He walked to the door. Fawkes watched him go. Harry, Dumbledore said. Harry stopped. I'm sorry, Dumbledore said. For what I failed to do. I know I've said it indirectly through solicitors and correspondence, but, he paused. I want to say it to you directly. Harry stood with his hand on the door and thought about what to do with this. He'd thought about it a lot, actually, not with bitterness, just with the practical interest he brought to problems that needed solving. He didn't need Dumbledore's guilt. He didn't need anything from Dumbledore, really. What he needed was Dumbledore to be honest and useful and to stop arranging things without telling him. I know, Harry said. Stay in the school on Halloween. He opened the door and left. The troll happened first, which was either coincidence or not. It came through the dungeons on Halloween evening while the students were at the feast and Harry was, against Augusta's standing instruction about eating properly, in the library verifying a piece of ward theory. He heard the screaming from 2 floors up, not the excited screaming of a prank, the actual screaming of people who'd encountered something that warranted it, and was already moving when Hermione burst through the library doors from the opposite direction. Troll, she said breathlessly. In the dungeons. Dumbledore's announced it, everyone's going to their dormitories, she stopped. But that's not where Quirrell is going to go. No, Harry said. Quirrell will use the confusion. He was already calculating the timing, troll in the dungeons, students evacuating upstairs, staff managing the chaos. Where's Neville? He was going back to the tower with Ron Weasley and his brothers. Hermione stopped. Wait. The girls' bathroom on the 2nd floor. I was up there, I didn't hear the announcement until I came back down. If there's a troll loose in the corridors and it got past the dungeons, Harry was already moving. Go to the tower. Tell Neville to stay put and to get the box from under my bed, the dark-bound one, not the brown one. He'll know what to do with it. What are you going to do? Hermione said. 3rd floor first, Harry said. If Quirrell's gone ahead already, Harry, I'm coming with you. He looked at her. She had her wand out, her chin set with the particular stubbornness she had that wasn't bravado, it was just her genuine assessment that leaving was the wrong option. He could argue with her or he could move. Don't get ahead of me, he said. They ran. The corridors were chaos, students streaming toward dormitories, prefects herding the younger ones, 2 professors heading toward the dungeons with their wands drawn and expressions of focused urgency. Harry and Hermione went the other way, against the flow, and nobody stopped them because in the chaos nobody was particularly looking at 2 first-years going the wrong direction. The 3rd floor corridor was empty. The door was open. Harry stopped outside it and looked at Hermione and she looked at him and they both looked at the darkness beyond the door and the very faint sound from within it that was, undeniably, 3 simultaneous sets of breathing. He's already through, Harry said. Or the dog's asleep. The music, Hermione said. She pointed at the door frame, where a small harp had been set on the floor, still playing itself with the faint magic of a sustained charm. He charmed it before he went in. Harry looked at the harp. It would stop eventually, sustained charms degraded without renewal. Which meant if Quirrell was counting on it, he had a window, and that window was closing. He stepped through the door. The 3-headed dog, Fluffy, which seemed an increasingly absurd name, was asleep in the middle of the room, 3 large heads resting on 3 paws, enormous and completely oblivious. The trapdoor in the floor beneath it was open. Hermione was at the door behind him. Harry, tell me you're good at music, Harry said. I played piano for 7 years, she said, which was exactly the right answer. Take over from the charm, Harry said. Keep it asleep. Can you sustain it long enough? She looked at the sleeping heads, at the harp, at her wand. Her jaw was set with that focused determination. Yes, she said. Not bravado. Assessment. If I'm not back in 20 minutes, I'll get Dumbledore, she said. Not before. 20 minutes, he said, and dropped through the trapdoor. He landed in something soft and immediately wrong. Devil's snare. He recognized it from Neville's descriptions, the tendrils, the instinct to struggle, the specific quality of darkness it liked. He had approximately 3 seconds before it decided he was worth constricting. He went completely still, let his body relax, and thought about what Neville had said about Devil's snare. It didn't like light and it didn't like heat, and he had a wand now. Lumos Maxima, he said, and the wand flared white bright and the snare recoiled with a sound like tearing cloth and he dropped through to the floor below. The rooms came in sequence and he moved through them fast, the winged keys with the disrepair of one that had been recently captured, confirming Quirrell was ahead of him, the chess set that had been blasted through rather than played, which was brute force and told him Quirrell hadn't needed subtlety, a smell of something dead that was the troll room, already unconscious, dealt with earlier. Snape's potion logic puzzle at the entrance to the final chamber. He stopped at the table. 7 bottles. A fire in front, purple fire behind, a note in careful curling script. He read it once, identified the safe bottles, logic, clean and straightforward, designed to reward reason, drank the cold bottle that would take him forward, felt the chill of it move through him, and stepped through the black fire. The mirror room was enormous and lit by candles that cast no shadows. Quirrell was at the mirror. He was standing in front of it with his back to Harry, and his posture was wrong, not the nervous, stuttering professor but something in him that was rigid and focused and radiating the kind of controlled energy that came from being very close to what you wanted. He was looking into the mirror, and his face in the reflection showed something that Harry could only see in profile, an expression of pure, focused hunger. Harry's wand was in his hand. He didn't announce himself. He observed. The mirror showed Quirrell holding the stone, and that was the trap. Quirrell was looking at himself using it, which meant he was wanting to use it, which meant the stone wasn't appearing for him no matter how long he stood there. It's not going to work, Harry said. Quirrell turned around. And then it happened, the thing Harry had been feeling in cold drafts and misaligned stutters for 7 weeks, the wrongness behind the eyes, it came to the surface fully, and it was not subtle. The stutter was gone. The nervousness was gone. The man standing in front of him had Quirrell's face and Quirrell's body but was looking at Harry with something ancient and patient and very, very cold. "Harry Potter," said a voice that wasn't quite Quirrell's. Quieter. Softer. Somehow worse for it. "You are not what I expected." "I've been told that before," Harry said. "You have your mother's eyes," the voice said, and it said it the way a knife touches something to test the resistance. "Yes," Harry said. "I've been told that before too." He was watching Quirrell's hands. Both visible, both at his sides, no wand yet. That was interesting. Whatever was using Quirrell was confident enough to talk first. "You are a remarkable child," the voice said. "What you have built in 3 years is extraordinary, truly. The estate, the legal proceedings, the board seat." A pause that had a smile in it Harry couldn't see. "You have inherited more than property, it seems." "You want the stone," Harry said. "I want a great many things," the voice said. "The stone is currently the most immediate of them." Quirrell's head tilted. "Do you know what it is to not have a body? To exist in this?" The disgust in the voice was genuine, and somehow that genuineness was more disturbing than the malice. "To be dependent on the loyalty of followers, on whatever host is willing or susceptible." A pause. "I was the most powerful wizard alive. And then your mother made you a weapon." "She gave me love," Harry said. "You keep calling it a weapon. That's a useful frame for you." Something in Quirrell's face shifted. "She died," the voice said, flat and quiet. "Yes," Harry said. "And it still stopped you." He kept his eyes on Quirrell's hands and kept his voice level. "Whatever you were expecting when you came back to Hogwarts, whatever version of me you prepared for, I want you to understand something clearly. He met what was looking at him through Quirrell's eyes. I am not afraid of you. A pause. Interesting, the voice said. Most people find that claim unconvincing when tested. Test it then, Harry said. It was a risk and he knew it was a risk and he accepted that because the alternative was letting the conversation continue while Quirrell figured out the angle he'd been missing, and Harry wanted to control the moment rather than wait for it. He had Petra's 3 years of training in his hands and Dorcas's theory in his head and the Peveril Ward knowledge in his wand arm, and if there was a time to find out whether any of that was equal to the situation, it was now. Quirrell moved fast, faster than a nervous professor had any business moving, and the spell that came from his wand was dark red and silent, and Harry dropped below it and came up casting the most layered shield he knew, built from the preministry technique Dorcas had taught him that used intent rather than motion as the primary structure, and the second spell hit the shield and cracked it but didn't break it. Interesting indeed, the voice said, and now it sounded engaged. Harry cast back, not Expelliarmus, not yet. He cast the restraint ward from the Peveril texts, the one that worked on anchoring rather than force, that targeted the physical location rather than the person and built outward, and Quirrell stumbled because his feet hit something like thick air and couldn't find the floor properly. Where did you learn that? The voice said, genuinely curious. Private library, Harry said, and moved left, and cast the second anchor point, and then the third. 3 points of the ward triangle. Quirrell was in the middle of it. He wasn't trapped, not fully, not with Harry's current level of skill, not in the time it had taken, but he was slowed, and the stone was still in the mirror, and every second that passed without Quirrell getting to it was a second working in Harry's direction. You can't hold me, the voice said. It was almost conversational. The power I have access to through this body, is limited by the body, Harry said. You're a parasite on a compromised host. You're stronger than Quirrell, but you're not as strong as you were. He held the triangle steady, feeling the effort of it in his wand arm, the particular strain of magic that was working against something that was working back. And you've spent 7 weeks being afraid to touch the one thing that could counter you. A pause. What thing? The voice said. My mother's protection, Harry said. She gave me something you can't take. You know that. You've known it since 1981. He pressed the ward anchors harder. That's why you talked first. What happened next was strange. Quirrell rushed the anchor points and the ward held for 3 seconds and then broke. Harry had expected it to hold longer and recalibrated fast, already moving back, but Quirrell didn't go for Harry. He went for the mirror. He reached for it and his hands touched the glass and Harry felt the cold expand outward like a wave and the mirror lit up from inside with a white gold light, and in the reflection Harry could see what Quirrell was seeing, himself, using the stone, just as before, and the stone still wasn't appearing. It's not there for you, Harry said. The enchantment works on desire. You want to use it. That's all you've ever. Quiet, the voice said, and now it was different. Now it was angry, genuinely angry, the cultivated patience stripped back to something raw and furious. Quirrell turned around from the mirror and his eyes were entirely wrong, lit from within by something that had stopped pretending. Harry stood his ground. The door behind him burst open. Dumbledore came through it like weather, not rushing, not panicked, simply arriving with the complete certainty of someone who had never once doubted his right to be in any room, and the room changed around him the way rooms did. The spinning instruments, the candles, the cold, everything seemed to orient itself differently with Dumbledore in it. Quirrell looked at him. The thing inside Quirrell looked at him. Tom, Dumbledore said. The name landed in the room like a stone in still water. Albus, the voice said, through Quirrell's mouth. And then, with the particular quality of something that has decided there is no longer any point in subtlety, you are too late. The boy almost had me. The boy, Dumbledore said quietly, generally does. He looked at Harry, just briefly, just for a moment, and the look said several things at once, none of which needed to be said out loud. Then he looked back at Quirrell. It's over, Tom. The stone cannot be taken. You know that. He doesn't have a body, Harry said, to Dumbledore. He needs a body that can reach it. He can't get through Flamel's enchantment from inside Quirrell because he needs his own hands, not a host's. He was working through it as he said it, the logic of it clicking into place. The mirror shows you with the stone, which means your desire is to use it, which means, he paused. Unless he goes through someone who wants to find it but not use it. Dumbledore looked at him sharply. Quirrell was looking at Harry with an expression of sudden, absolute attention. Harry understood, exactly 1 second too late, that he should not have said that out loud. Quirrell moved. Not toward the mirror, toward Harry. What followed was not elegant. It was fast and close and significantly more frightening than anything that had come before, because Quirrell's hands were reaching for Harry's face and the cold that came off him was the cold of something trying to cross between the living and the dead, and Harry cast with both instinct and training simultaneously, layered light spells over the mother's protection like Dorcas had described, built the intent shield outward from himself rather than in front of himself. Quirrell's hands made contact. And then Quirrell screamed. It was not a planned thing, not a tactic, not a gambit. Quirrell's hands on Harry's face simply burned. Harry could feel the burn in reverse, could feel the cold meeting the warmth of whatever his mother had left in him, and every point of contact was agony for Quirrell and warmth for Harry, and the contrast was almost incomprehensible. Quirrell recoiled. Harry stepped forward. He pressed his hand to Quirrell's face. The light was blinding. The scream was 2 voices and then one and then neither. Dumbledore was there when Harry's vision cleared, one hand on Harry's shoulder, and Quirrell was on the floor not moving, and the mirror stood in the corner reflecting nothing but the room itself, and the stone was in Harry's hand. He looked at it. Small and red and warm in his palm. I can't use it, he said. I can feel that I can't. No, Dumbledore said. You have no desire for it. The enchantment gives it to you because you'd return it. He paused. Which is exactly what needs to happen. Harry looked at Quirrell. Is he alive? Dumbledore said. Barely. The possession, when Voldemort was expelled, it took considerable. He stopped. Tom is gone. For now. Not permanently. No, Harry said. Not permanently. He turned the stone over in his hand. You need to get this back to Flamel. And you need to tell him the situation has changed enough that keeping it in Britain is a risk. He looked up at Dumbledore. It should be destroyed. Dumbledore looked at him. It'll kill Flamel, Dumbledore said quietly. He and his wife. They're over 600 years old. Without it, I know, Harry said. But leaving it available, leaving the possibility, he closed his fingers around the stone. Voldemort will come back and he'll try again, and next time the approach will be different. He knows what the mirror does now. He'll plan around it. He held out the stone to Dumbledore. It has to go. Dumbledore took it from him with an expression that was not simple. None of his expressions were simple. This one had grief in it, and something else, something that Harry thought was the particular complicated feeling of being shown, plainly and without malice, that someone else was right. Flamel will understand, Harry said. I think he's probably always understood. Yes, Dumbledore said. I think he has. He closed his hand around the stone. Harry, don't, Harry said, not unkindly. You don't need to say anything. Just, don't make unilateral decisions about things that affect other people's lives. Not anymore. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. No, he said. I won't. Fawkes appeared. Harry had no idea how, but phoenixes apparently came when they were needed and asked no permission, and landed on Harry's shoulder, and the warmth of it after the cold was extraordinary, and Harry stood in a room that smelled of recently expelled dark magic and let a phoenix sit on his shoulder and breathed. Quirrell was moved. Hospitalized. He would recover physically, though the portrait of him afterwards, drawn, diminished, the specific hollowness of someone who had been used and discarded, was not a comfortable thing to look at. Harry visited him once, briefly, and Quirrell looked at him with his own eyes, his own nervous, anxious, genuine eyes, and said something that Harry heard as both simple and complicated. "I'm sorry," Quirrell said. At the beginning, I didn't know what I was letting in." "I know," Harry said. "Get better." That was all. Neville found him on the 7th floor, near a particular tapestry Harry had discovered concealed a useful room. "Hermione told me what happened," Neville said. He was looking at Harry with the direct, steady concern he had when he decided not to dance around something. "I'm fine," Harry said. "You fought Voldemort." "I fought a man being used by Voldemort," Harry said. "There's a distinction." "Most people would be, I know what most people would be," Harry said. "I'm fine, Neville. Actually fine, not performing fine." Neville looked at him for a moment. He had, over 3 years of friendship, developed a fairly reliable ability to distinguish between the two. He nodded. "What happens now?" he said. "To the stone, the stone goes back to Flamel and gets destroyed," Harry said. "Voldemort is gone again, not permanently, but gone. Quirrell's recovering." He leaned back against the wall. "And tomorrow I need to write to Ragnarok, because there are implications here for the estate that I need to think through." Neville sat beside him on the floor. "What implications?" "If Voldemort comes back with a proper body," Harry said, "he's going to come after everything I've built. The estate, the property rights, the political influence, all of it represents something he wants. Wizarding Britain, properly, with him at the head." He looked at the ceiling. "The legal and political structure I've been building is a target. So what do we do?" "Make it stronger," Harry said simply. "Make it so deeply, thoroughly, legally, and magically embedded that it's inextricable from how Wizarding Britain functions. Not as protection for me, as protection for the structure itself." He paused. "The Longbottom seat on the Wizengamot." Neville looked at him. "My family's seat." "Your grandmother holds it," Harry said. "But it should eventually be yours. And your position on that body is going to matter." He turned his head to look at Neville directly. "You're going to be a force in that chamber, Neville. Not because of your name, because you're honest and careful and you understand what things are actually for." Neville was quiet for a moment. "You really think that?" he said. "I don't say things I don't think," Harry said. "That's been true since we met." Another silence. A comfortable one. "Hermione's going to be insufferable about having been right about Quirrell," Neville said. Harry laughed. "She was right about Quirrell. That's going to make it worse." "Yes," Harry agreed. "Let her be right. She earned it." Down in the school below them, dinner was ending and students were moving through corridors and the castle was doing its ancient, complicated thing of holding hundreds of different lives in its walls simultaneously, and somewhere in it Dumbledore was sitting with a small red stone deciding how to tell an old alchemist that his greatest creation needed to end. And somewhere in Albania, a thing that had been expelled from a borrowed body was looking for its next opportunity with the patient fury of something that had existed long enough to simply wait. Harry sat on the floor of the 7th floor corridor and thought about what came next. Not with dread. Not even with particular worry, though there were things in what was coming that warranted worry. More with the focused, clear-eyed assessment of someone who had learned, over 3 years, that the answer to most problems was to understand them completely before they arrived. He'd been 8 years old when Ragnarok had handed him a ledger and changed everything. He was 11 now, and he'd just expelled a fragment of the most feared dark wizard in a century from a borrowed body using his mother's love and 3 years of preministry ward theory. He was, he thought, just getting started. "Come on," he said, standing and offering Neville a hand up. "I want to check on the greenhouses before curfew." "The mandrakes need turning anyway," Neville said, taking the hand. They walked down through the castle together, and the war that was coming waited patiently in the distance, and Harry walked toward it in the exact same way he walked toward everything. with his eyes open and his head up and absolutely no intention of losing. Chapter 6, The inheritance claimed. Summer came to Potter Manor in long gold bars through tall windows. Harry spent the first 2 weeks of holidays doing nothing in particular, which was a conscious decision. He read in the library. He worked in the greenhouses with Neville, who had practically moved in, Augusta and Neville's grandmother having arranged something between them that nobody had formally announced, but that meant Neville was simply there most mornings. Hermione came for a week in July with a bag twice her size and an ambitious reading list and took over the second-floor study with the focused efficiency of someone who had identified a library worth taking seriously. It was, Harry thought, the first summer that had ever felt like one. He let himself have it. Not entirely. There were letters to Ragnarok, there were estate matters, there were 2 Wisengamot briefings that Augusta felt he needed to attend, but mostly he let the days be long and warm and full of the ordinary things that he had never had ordinary access to before. Breakfast that someone made for him. Space that was his. People who were there because they wanted to be. Neville found him one afternoon in the Peveril wing of the library, surrounded by 3 open journals and a pot of cold tea. "You've been in here for 6 hours," Neville said. "I know," Harry said. "It's warm outside." "I know that too." Neville sat down across from him and looked at the journals. "What are you working on?" "The Horcrux problem," Harry said. Neville went very still. He had heard the word once before, in passing, from Harry, after the third-floor corridor, and the stillness was not ignorance but recognition. "You're sure?" "I'm sure he made them," Harry said. "I'm not sure how many or where they are." He turned one of the journals to show Neville the page, an annotated passage in pre-Reformation magical theory, one of the Peveril-era texts, describing soul fragmentation as a theoretical extreme of dark magic practice. The journals don't use the specific term, but the theory is there. Splitting the soul, anchoring it to objects. It's why he didn't die in 1981 and why expelling him from Quirrell in May wasn't permanent. He looked up. He's not one thing. He's several things in several places. Neville read the passage slowly. "Can they be destroyed?" "Yes," Harry said. "That's what I'm working on. Understanding the mechanism of destruction and what it costs." He paused. "The process of making one creates a marker, a specific magical signature. Once you know the signature, you can identify the objects." He turned to another page. "There's a detection method in here. It's from 1387 and it's not simple, but it works." "How do you know it works?" Harry looked at him. "I have one on me," he said. The room was very quiet. "The scar," Neville said, very carefully. "Yes." Harry's voice was level. Completely level, the way it got when something was significant and he'd already done the processing and come through the other side. "When Voldemort's curse hit me in 1981, the feedback, whatever happened, it fragmented something from him and attached it to me. The scar isn't just a scar. There's a piece of him in it." Neville was looking at him with an expression that was trying not to be frightened and managing it through the particular effort of someone who cared deeply about the person they were looking at. "Neville," Harry said. "I've known for about 3 weeks and I'm fine." "You're telling me there's a piece of Voldemort in your head and you're fine?" "I've had it for 10 years, Harry said. "The difference is now I know it's there." He turned another page. "And knowing means I can do something about it." "What something?" "That's what I'm working on," Harry said. "Sit down. I'll tell you what I know." Neville sat down. Harry told him everything. Hermione took it differently, which was to say she immediately borrowed 4 books and disappeared for 36 hours and came back with 17 pages of notes and the particular expression she had when she'd been frightened and processed it by becoming very thorough. She put the notes on the table in front of Harry. "The Horcrux destruction methods in standard dark arts theory are all destructive to the container," she said. "Basilisk venom, fiend fire, the killing curse, all of them destroy the object along with the fragment." She looked at him directly. Which creates an obvious problem for the one in you. Yes, Harry said. So you can't use standard methods. No. Which means we need a non-standard method. She sat down. I found 2 references in the material from your library. One is theoretical, a concept in the Peveril Papers about sacrificial love as a destructive force for soul fragments, which you've already experienced a version of with Quirrell. She paused. The other is practical, but I don't fully understand it yet. It refers to something called the separation ward, a pre-ministry technique for extracting foreign magical elements from a living host. Harry looked up. Where is that reference? Box 6, Hermione said. The one with the purple binding. Page 247, with 3 pages of annotations in what I think is your great-great-grandmother's handwriting. She held up the notes. I've transcribed the relevant sections. Harry looked at the transcription. He read it twice. His expression didn't change, but he sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. This is doable, he said. In theory, Hermione said. I'd want 3 independent corroborating sources before I called it more than theoretical. Then we find 3, Harry said. We have 2 months before 2nd year. He lowered his eyes from the ceiling. Ragnarok will know people who understand preministry magical techniques. There are also 2 living practitioners of the old traditions. I've had correspondence with one of them through the estate. A witch in the Orkney Islands named Morag Mac Crimmon who holds the old compact with the Selkies and maintains a preministry ward practice. He picked up Hermione's notes. I'll write to her today. If it's possible, Hermione said, and she was looking at him with the particular careful attention she had when she was asking something that mattered more than she was making it sound. When would you do it? Not until I know where the others are, Harry said. Destroying the one in me while the others remain intact doesn't solve the problem. He can reconstitute from any of them. He turned a page. We need all of them, or most of them, before he comes back properly. And when he comes back, Neville said, from the doorway where he'd apparently been standing long enough to catch the last several exchanges, holding 3 cups of tea with the focused concentration of someone who had learned from bitter experience not to spill them. What happens then? Harry looked at him. Then we end it. The 3 of us, Neville said, setting the tea down carefully. The 3 of us and everyone else who's been building something worth protecting, Harry said. This isn't, I want to be clear about this. I'm not going to handle Voldemort by being a hero in a corridor. I'm going to handle it by having spent years making sure there are structures in place, people in position, information shared, so that when he comes back he's not fighting a frightened boy. He's fighting everything I've built. Hermione wrapped her hands around her cup. That's a better plan than most. It's the only plan, Harry said. The alternative is waiting to be a target. I'd rather be a problem. Morag Mac Crimmon wrote back within a week. Her letter was short, written on paper that had been folded and unfolded many times and smelled of sea air, in a handwriting that was precise and very old in its style. She had heard of Lord Potter Peveril and his recent proceedings with some satisfaction. She was familiar with the theoretical framework he had described. She was willing to meet. She was also, the letter added as a very brief postscript, aware of the nature of his specific situation and had been for some time, as certain very old wards had a tendency to show their practitioners things they hadn't necessarily gone looking for. Harry read this postscript several times. She knows about the Horcrux, Hermione said, reading over his shoulder. She knows about something, Harry said. We should go in person. Augusta, when informed of this plan, had opinions. She expressed them at length and with her characteristic directness, and Harry listened to all of them, and then said that he was going, and that he'd like to bring Neville and Hermione, and that Augusta was welcome to come as well. There was a pause. Obviously I'm coming, Augusta said, as if the invitation had been unnecessary, and went to write to Neville's grandmother about extended absence. The Orkney Islands were extraordinary in the way that very old magical places were extraordinary, not showy, just deeply themselves, the magic worn into them the way weathering wore into stone. Morag MacCrimmon's house was on a cliff above a grey sea, built of the same stone as the cliff and barely distinguishable from it, with wards that Harry felt like pressure changes in the air when they crossed through them. Morag herself was very old and very small, with white hair and dark eyes and the particular quality of stillness that came from being genuinely unimpressed by most things. She looked at Harry when he came through her door and said, without preamble, "You've been carrying it around your whole life and you only noticed 3 weeks ago." "Yes," Harry said. "Sit down," she said. "All of you." They sat in a room that smelled of salt and old wood and something herbal, and Morag looked at Harry across a table covered in stones and objects and things Harry couldn't name, and she said, "Take off your glasses." He took them off. She leaned forward and looked at his scar with focused, unhurried attention. Not with wand, not with an instrument, just looking, the way someone looked who had been doing this for 70 years and had learned to see without tools. "Old magic," she said. "Very old." She sat back. "I know the separation ward you found in the Peveril papers. I learned it from the woman who wrote those annotations. She let that land. Your great-great-grandmother was my teacher. She died in 1899. I was 17. She looked at Hermione. Your notes were accurate. The method is sound. Hermione exhaled. 3 independent corroborating sources, she said, to herself. The difficulty, Morag said, is not the technique. The technique is straightforward for someone of your bloodline. The Peveril ward tradition is in your blood as much as your inheritance, and the separation ward responds to bloodline the way most preministry magic does. She paused. The difficulty is that the fragment in you has had 11 years to settle. It's not just attached. It's woven in. She looked at Harry. When you remove it, there will be a period where some of what you experience as yourself will feel different. Different how? Things you've attributed to yourself may turn out to be the fragment's influence, she said. Certain instincts, certain affinities. The Parselmouth ability, for instance. Harry had known this was coming and had decided how to receive it. That goes when the fragment goes. Very likely, Morag said. Fine, Harry said. Morag looked at him carefully. You said that very easily. I've had 3 weeks to make peace with it, Harry said. And it's not, it was never mine. It came from him. Losing it isn't a loss. He paused. What else? There may be some residual connection to the remaining fragments, Morag said. Which, during the period between your own separation and the destruction of the others, could create a form of awareness. You might sense their location. She looked at him. This is useful, but it's also uncomfortable. I'll manage uncomfortable, Harry said. Yes, Morag said, looking at him with those dark, direct eyes. I expect you will. They didn't do the separation ward that summer. Morag was clear that timing mattered. The technique required specific conditions, including a new moon and a period of minimum external magical interference, and the best window was the following spring. Harry noted this and planned around it, and in the meantime went back to Hogwarts for second year with his notebook full of new information and his list of targets organized by likelihood of location. Second year had the basilisk problem. This deserves explaining carefully, because most accounts of what happened in Harry's second year at Hogwarts focus on the Chamber of Secrets and the monster within it and the series of petrifications that reduced the school to a state of collective dread. These things were real. The petrification of 6 students was real and serious and frightening in the specific way that finding people frozen with terror in empty corridors was frightening, and Harry felt the weight of each one. What is less commonly reported is how quickly Harry identified the problem. He was in the library, naturally, within 48 hours of the first petrification, working through Goblin historical records that Ragnarok had provided access to years ago, specifically the Hogwarts Foundation documents. The Chamber of Secrets was not a myth. It was a structural feature. It was in the original building plans, noted as an auxiliary chamber in the founder's initial specifications, with a notation in Salazar Slytherin's own architectural notes that Harry translated from archaic runic script in approximately an hour, the speaking chamber, for the preservation of the old traditions. Access through the mouth of the speaking snake. Keeper, the great serpent of the basilisk lineage, maintained in stasis. You can read that, Hermione said, looking over his shoulder. Runic script, Harry said. Box 3 in the Manor Library. Took me about 4 months to work through it properly. Not the runes, Hermione said. The parcel script notation at the bottom. That bit. Harry looked at where she was pointing. There was a secondary notation in what was, he realized, not runic script at all. It was a written form of Parseltongue, which he hadn't known existed until this moment, and he was reading it without even registering that he was reading it. He sat back. Right, he said. So that's what that is. He found the entrance in October, the second-floor girls' bathroom, Moaning Myrtle's bathroom, which he had located by following the cold draft sensation that had become a reliable internal compass for things magically significant. He opened it in 10 minutes, which caused Hermione to make a strangled sound of admiration and frustration, went down alone, leaving Hermione with strict instructions and Neville with the specific box of emergency ward components he kept for situations that warranted them, and found the basilisk. The basilisk was very large and very old and very deeply asleep. Harry stood in the chamber, which was genuinely remarkable as architecture, damp and dark and full of carved serpent columns, and looked at the sleeping basilisk and thought about what he was dealing with. A living creature, maintained in stasis for 1,000 years, currently being controlled through a fragment of Tom Riddle's soul preserved in a diary. He'd already identified the diary, had recognized the Horcrux signature the moment Ginny Weasley had started behaving differently in October, had spent 2 weeks finding where she was keeping it and one afternoon with a politely firm conversation extracting it from her possession without explaining fully why. The diary was currently in a sealed box in his room at Potter Manor, contained by 3 layers of the Peveril isolation wards. Without the diary's influence, the basilisk was just a very old, very large magical creature in an enchanted sleep. It hadn't petrified anyone on its own initiative. It had been directed. Harry sat on the chamber floor and thought about this for a while. Then he opened his mouth and spoke, and the sound that came out was not English. The basilisk's eyes, sealed, thank Merlin, the eyelids down, moved. The enormous head shifted. Something very deep and very old became aware that someone was in the room with it and was saying something in a language it understood. Harry asked it if it was well. This was not the approach most people would have taken. The basilisk's response, a low, grinding vibration that traveled through the floor, communicated several things that Harry translated with some effort, because the Parselmouth ability in him was the fragments and therefore not perfectly fluent, but the essential message was, confused, disoriented, had been made to do things it had not wanted to do. I know, Harry said, in the same language. That's finished now. He sat in the chamber for 2 hours. He learned the basilisk's name, Sophia, which seemed incongruous and was rather charming, and established that she had been placed in the chamber willingly, as a guardian, by Slytherin himself, under the original enchantment that she would sleep until called by a true heir of the line. She had not expected the calling to involve being used as a weapon against children. Harry told her that he was the true heir of Slytherin's line, through the absorbed inheritance, which she seemed to already know. He told her that the situation had been resolved. He asked if she wished to remain in the chamber or if alternative arrangements would be preferred. She wanted, she indicated, to sleep again, undisturbed this time, without the possibility of future misuse. Harry thought about this and said he could arrange a more permanent stasis, a deep one, sealed by a Peveril ward rather than Slytherin's original enchantment, which had been compromised. Sophia accepted this with what translated, roughly, as dignified relief. It took him most of the remaining time to construct the ward correctly. When it settled over the basilisk, deep and clean and permanent, the chamber felt different. Quieter. The 1,000-year tension of a living creature kept in uneasy suspension simply, resolved. He climbed back out. Hermione was in the bathroom with her arms crossed and an expression of carefully maintained calm that was doing a great deal of work. "Well? It's handled," Harry said. "The petrifications will reverse without the diary's influence. I've sealed the chamber." He brushed stone dust off his robes. "The diary needs to be destroyed. I'll do it tonight." "With what?" Hermione said. "Standard destruction methods don't, basilisk venom," Harry said. He held up a small sealed vial. "She shed recently. Seemed only right to ask." Hermione stared at him. "You asked the basilisk for venom. She was very cooperative once we'd established a rapport." "You had a rapport with a basilisk." "She prefers Sophia," Harry said. "I think she's been quite lonely, honestly." Hermione looked at the ceiling. "I can't tell if you're remarkable or completely alarming." "Probably both," Harry said. "Come on." The diary died that evening on the stone floor of a disused classroom, basilisk venom hissing through its pages, and Harry watched the darkness pour out of it, black, dense, the same cold draft wrongness he'd first felt around Quirrell, and disperse. Horcrux 1, the diary. Destroyed. Horcrux 2, the fragment in Harry himself. Pending, spring, new moon, Morag's separation ward. Which left the others. He'd been building the list since summer. The Peveril detection method had a range limitation that required him to be within a certain distance of an object to confirm it, but the theoretical framework gave him categories: objects of significance to the maker, things associated with the founders, things that represented power or status or memory to someone who had grown up with none of those things. He had 4 candidates identified. A locket with Slytherin provenance that historical records placed in the Black family vault. A cup with Hufflepuff markings last recorded in the possession of a witch named Bellatrix Lestrange. A diadem with Ravenclaw attribution that had been lost for centuries, but the chamber's architecture had given him a significant clue about where someone with riddle-specific psychology might have chosen to hide something in Hogwarts itself. And something, the detection method was less clear here, something serpentine and alive. Nagini. He didn't have full confirmation yet, but the logic pointed to it. He wrote to Ragnarok about the locket. He visited Madame Longbottom about her knowledge of Bellatrix Lestrange's holdings. He spent 3 evenings in the Room of Requirement, which he had found in October by the simple method of walking the 7th floor corridor and paying attention to the castle's responses, looking for the diadem. He found it on the 3rd evening, on a shelf behind a broken wardrobe, encrusted with centuries of dust and radiating the specific signature he now recognized immediately. He left it where it was and put a temporary detection ward around it. 3 locations confirmed. 4 targets total, including himself. The 5th, Nagini, would require Voldemort's actual return, which he wasn't going to rush. He told Hermione. He told Neville. He told Ragnarok, in a fire call that Ragnarok absorbed with the stillness of someone integrating very large information very quickly. "You're 11 years old," Ragnarok said. 12, Harry said. "Since July." 12 years old, Ragnarok said, "and you have located 4 of Voldemort's soul fragments." "Approximately," Harry said. "The 5th is uncertain." "The 5th," Ragnarok said, "requires Voldemort to have a body." "Yes," Harry said. "Which gives us time." He paused. "I need the locket." "The Black Vault is inaccessible without Black family authorization," Ragnarok said. "Currently the Black estate is held in a complicated trust pending the resolution of Sirius Black's imprisonment." Harry went still. "Sirius Black. Your godfather," Ragnarok said, with the careful tone of someone delivering information they are not sure has been delivered before. Harry looked at him through the flames. "I have a godfather." A pause. "Yes," Ragnarok said. "I had assumed," he stopped. "The records were sealed. Part of the original executor's authority. Dumbledore had access to the Black family cross-connections." A longer pause. Sirius Black is in Azkaban, convicted of 12 murders and the betrayal of your parents. He has been there since 1981. Without trial, Harry said. It wasn't a question. He was already working through the implication. Without trial, Ragnock confirmed. Harry sat back. The fire crackled. His jaw was set in the way it got when something had moved from complicated to infuriating and he was choosing what to do with that. Pull the records, he said. Everything. His arrest documentation, the ministry proceedings, any evidence filed. He met Ragnock's eyes through the flames. Castleton is going to be busy. Castleton will be delighted, Ragnock said, with the dry accuracy of someone who had observed Castleton's relationship with complicated legal situations. Sirius Black's trial, or rather, the Wisingamot proceedings convened to address the fact that he'd never had one, happened in April of Harry's second year. Harry sat in the gallery of the Wisingamot chamber with Augusta on one side and Hermione on the other, and watched the proceedings with the particular focused attention he brought to things he had spent 3 months preparing for. Castleton had been magnificent. The documentation was airtight, no trial, no evidence formally entered, no examination of the wand, no veritaserum administered. A ministry official who had been, as Castleton put it with exquisite legal precision, responding to political pressure rather than legal obligation, had simply signed the commitment papers and Sirius Black had gone to Azkaban on the strength of circumstantial evidence and public grief. The Wisingamot was not, currently, happy about this. Harry had helped with that. In the 2 weeks before the proceedings, he had had 3 private conversations, with Madame Bones, with 2 senior Wisingamot members whose positions on due process were matters of record, and with the legal correspondent at the Daily Prophet who had covered his own case 3 years ago and who had, as Harry had expected, found the story irresistible. The headline the morning of the proceedings had been, 12 years without trial, the Sirius Black scandal. The chamber was at capacity. The evidence that emerged over 3 hours was damning, not of Sirius Black, but of a ministry that had needed someone to punish and had found a convenient candidate and declined to look too closely. Veritaserum, administered under Madame Bones' careful supervision, revealed a man who had watched his best friend murdered and his godson orphaned and had gone to confront the actual traitor, Peter Pettigrew, who was alive, who had faked his death, who had been living as a rat in a Weasley family home for 12 years, and had been framed for a crime committed by the person he'd been trying to stop. Harry watched all of this. He watched Sirius Black, gaunt, visibly diminished by 12 years of Azkaban, but with a quality in him that wasn't broken, sit in the chair below the Wisingamot and answer every question in a voice that was hoarse and direct and completely without self-pity. When the verdict came, acquittal, unanimous, with a formal ministry censure for the original proceedings, the chamber erupted. Harry slipped out while the noise covered his movement and went down to the holding room where they'd told him Sirius would be brought after proceedings concluded. He waited. Sirius came in with a Wisingamot attendant, who withdrew when Harry said, "Family," and it was just the 2 of them in a stone room that smelled of old paper, and Sirius Black looked at Harry Potter for the first time in 11 years. Whatever he'd expected, whatever version of this moment he'd constructed in Azkaban in the long dark, Harry could see the recalibration happening in real time. He looked at Harry the way Dumbledore had looked at him, the way almost every adult looked at him eventually, like they'd prepared for one thing and found another. Harry looked back at him and saw the shape of his father's best friend underneath the damage Azkaban had done, and felt something he didn't have a clean word for. "Hi," Harry said. Sirius opened his mouth and closed it. He looked like someone trying to find the beginning of a very long sentence and not knowing where it started. "You're really him," Sirius said. "Yes," Harry said. "You look," he stopped. "James. You look exactly, I know," Harry said. "I have my mother's eyes. Everyone tells me." Something broke open in Sirius Black's face, not collapsing, not falling apart, but opening, the way a fist opened when it finally didn't need to be a fist anymore. He laughed, sudden and slightly undone, and it sounded like it had been waiting a long time. Harry crossed the room and Sirius dropped to his knees, not dramatically, just because he was suddenly not quite steady, and Harry put his arms around him, and for a moment they stayed like that in the stone room while 12 years of completely wrong history sat around them. "I tried to get to you," Sirius said, very quietly. "Afterwards. I went straight to Godric's Hollow and then I went after Peter because I thought if I got him it would count for something. I wasn't thinking straight." He pulled back enough to look at Harry. "Dumbledore had already moved you." "I know," Harry said. "I found out about you in February. I'm sorry it took this long." "You're 12, Sirius said. "You've been running legal proceedings and property cases since you were 8 and you're apologizing to me for, there's more I need to tell you," Harry said. "Quite a lot more. But the most important thing right now is that you're out, and I want you to come to Potter Manor, and then we'll figure out the rest." Sirius looked at him. The gauntness, the grey in his hair, the marks that Azkaban had put in him, they were real and they were going to take time. But his eyes were clear, and they were James Potter's best friend's eyes, and they were looking at Harry with something that was already the beginning of the thing they were going to build. "Potter Manor," Sirius said. "I haven't been there since, it's in good shape," Harry said. "I had it restored." A pause. "Your room is still there. 3rd floor, East Wing." "I left it as it was." Sirius was quiet for a moment. "How did you know which room?" "The estate records," Harry said. "You're in them. You and my father. There are photographs." He paused. "I've been looking at them for 3 years." Sirius made a sound that was not quite crying and not quite laughing and was probably both, and Harry waited, and when Sirius straightened up again he had the particular expression of someone who had decided to be all right because the alternative was not useful. "Right," Sirius said. "Let's go home." The spring separation ward happened on a night in late April with a new moon and a cold clear sky above Potter Manor, the sea smell of Morag Mac Crimmon drifting across from wherever she'd operate in, the groundskeeper's lanterns making soft circles of light in the restored garden. Neville and Hermione were there. Augusta was there. Sirius was there, 2 weeks out of Azkaban and still thin but steady, standing near the garden wall with his arms folded and his eyes on Harry with the focused attention of someone who had decided that whatever happened next, he was going to be present for it. Morag arranged the ward components with the unhurried precision of someone who had done this before. She'd done it 3 times in her career, removing dark enchantments from living hosts, and she explained each step in a clear, quiet voice that was somehow both instructional and grounding. "The ward separates the foreign element by the same principle as the Peveril bloodline detection," she said, drawing the circle. "It identifies what is native to you and what is not, and it creates a boundary between them. Then it pushes the foreign element out through the site of original entry." She looked at Harry. "The scar. It will hurt." "I know," Harry said. "Sit in the center." She looked at the others. "Stay outside the circle. Whatever you see, stay outside." Harry sat in the middle of the ward circle on the cold grass and looked up at the moonless sky full of stars, and breathed, and let himself be still. Morag began the ward. It was not dramatic in the way that most magical things in stories were dramatic. It was slow and quiet and deeply uncomfortable in the way that internal things were uncomfortable, the feeling of something that had been part of the landscape of yourself for 11 years being identified as separate. The scar burned, not the sharp, incidental burning he'd felt around Voldemort's presence, but a sustained, deep ache that was the sensation of a boundary being drawn through something that had never had one. Harry sat with his eyes open and breathed through it. He thought about the ledger. The first time he'd seen his name at the top of a page that changed everything. He thought about Ragnar's amber eyes across a table full of his parents' inheritance. He thought about Augusta's 2-second hug and Neville's quiet presence in the right places and Hermione's 17 pages of notes. He thought about Sirius's laugh in the stone room, the sound of something that had been waiting 11 years to happen. He thought about his mother, who had loved him and left that love in him like a ward, like the most permanent structure ever built. The cold draft sensation, that wrongness that he had lived with so long he'd stopped noticing it, rose suddenly, fiercely, and tried to settle back. Harry didn't fight it. He just declined it, the way you decline something with a simple, clear no, and felt the Peveril bloodline respond beneath him in the ground, old and deep in his completely, and the cold gathered itself and was expelled, his scar blazed white. He didn't cry out. He tilted his head back and felt it go through and out, and the cold dispersed into the night air, and then, silence. A different kind of silence. The silence of a room when someone has left it who was there for so long you'd stopped hearing them. Harry sat in the middle of the ward circle and breathed and felt the difference. Morag extinguished the ward components. She crouched beside him and looked at his scar, which was still red but was just a scar now, just the mark of a spell and a night in 1981, without anything behind it. "Well," she said. "Different," Harry said. "Different good?" He thought about it. The absence of the fragment was like the absence of background noise you hadn't known was there, not loss, exactly. Lighter. Cleaner. More purely himself. "Yes," he said. "Different good." He stood up. Sirius was at the edge of the circle with an expression that was trying not to be too much of anything and failing. Harry walked over to him and Sirius gripped his shoulder and Harry let him. "How do you feel?" Sirius said. "I feel like myself," Harry said. "Just, all of myself. Nothing else." Sirius exhaled. "Good," he said roughly. He stopped. "Good." Voldemort came back in the summer between Harry's second and third year. Not dramatically, not with a battle or an army or a moment of theatrical emergence. He came back the way someone came back when they'd been patient long enough, quietly, efficiently, using a ritual that Pettigrew performed in an abandoned graveyard in Little Hangleton, which Harry knew about 20 minutes before it happened because the Nagini connection was the one Horcrux he hadn't been able to destroy and therefore still had a residual awareness of. He'd found Nagini through a 3-month tracking operation that had involved Ragnarok's international contacts, 2 careful communications with Narcissa Malfoy about Albanian Death Eater activity, and the specific awareness Morag had warned him about, the uncomfortable residual sensitivity that had been quietly providing data for months. He'd located her. He'd informed Dumbledore. He'd prepared. But the ritual was faster than anticipated and the window was too narrow, and Voldemort returned to a body, pale, terrible, cold in a way that Harry could now feel clearly without the fragment's muddying presence, before the response could be mobilized. Harry apparat to Little Hangleton with Sirius. He was 12 years old and he'd been legally allowed to apparate for 3 months on the basis of a special dispensation that Augusta had pushed through the Wisengamot in January, on the grounds that the heir to the largest wizarding estate in Britain having to take a bus was a national embarrassment. The graveyard was cold and dark and smelled of freshly turned earth and the specific acrid smell of dark ritual completion. Pettigrew was there, diminished and frightened and holding his arm where it ended. Voldemort was in the middle of the graveyard in a body that was new and wrong and radiating the cold that Harry knew very well. He turned when Harry arrived. "Harry Potter," Voldemort said. "Tom Riddle," Harry said. The name landed the same way it always did, with the particular weight of truth applied to something that had been hiding from itself. Something complex moved across Voldemort's face. "You destroyed my diary," he said. "My locket, I see, is also gone." He tilted his head. "And the fragment I put in you. You removed that as well." "Yes," Harry said. "Impressive," Voldemort said. The word was genuine. He had the capacity, Harry thought, to recognize quality when he met it, it was just that his recognition of quality was entirely detached from anything like empathy. "You've been busy." "I have 2 more to find," Harry said. "The cup and the diadem." He watched Voldemort's face. "The diadem I already know. The cup is in Lestrange's vault." A long pause. "You're telling me," Voldemort said slowly, "what you know." "Yes," Harry said. "Why?" "Because you already know I know," Harry said. "Hiding it is pointless. And because I want you to understand the position clearly." He stood in the cold graveyard with his wand at his side and Sirius beside him and the summer stars above them. You have a body. The Horcruxes I haven't destroyed yet, the cup and the diadem, they don't give you victory. They just make you harder to kill. He met the red eyes directly. But you're not winning this, Tom. Not the war, not Britain, not any of it. The political and legal structures I've built, the estate, the Wisingamot positions, the alliances, they don't disappear because you're back. They get stronger. You think power bases protect you, Voldemort said, and his tone was almost educational. I have taken more powerful empires than, you haven't taken anything yet, Harry said. And you're going to find that taking it is considerably harder than you expected. He held his ground. I'm not here to fight you tonight. You're one day back in a body. Fight me now and you're not at full strength and I've had 3 years of pre-ministry ward training and I've already taken apart 4 of your Horcruxes. A pause. We both know how that goes. Voldemort was very still. I'm here, Harry said, because I wanted to see you. Because I wanted you to see me. He looked at him with the complete, unblinking steadiness that he'd always had and that had spent 3 years becoming something considerably more than its original quiet stubbornness. I'm not afraid of you. I wasn't afraid at 11 in the mirror room and I'm not afraid now. That's not going to change. He stepped back. Go rebuild your network. Figure out your strategy. Take whatever time you need. He turned to go. Potter, Voldemort said. Harry looked back. You are, Voldemort said, and there was something in his voice that was very strange, not respect, exactly, but the specific quality of an apex predator recognizing another apex predator, complicated and involuntary and not entirely comfortable for either party. Extraordinary. I know, Harry said. Good night, Tom. He turned and walked out of the graveyard with Sirius, and behind him the cold intensified briefly and then settled into the summer night, and Voldemort watched him go. The cup came from Lestrange's vault through Gringotts' heritage court proceedings that Castleton had prepared 18 months in advance, on the basis that an object fitting the description of Helga Hufflepuff's cup had been deposited there without legitimate provenance documentation, making it subject to Foundation-era heritage law and therefore subject to estate recovery proceedings by the primary Hufflepuff-adjacent bloodline holder. Which was, as it turned out, Harry, through the same Gryffindor-adjacent absorption that had already given him the Hogwarts board seat. The cup was signed over to his custody in September. He destroyed it in the manor's warded lower room with a piece of basilisk fong that Morag had helped him safely retrieve and preserve, and watched the darkness pour out of it the same way it had poured out of the diary. Horcrux 3, the cup. Destroyed. The diadem he took from the room of requirement in October, carefully, with Hermione and Neville and the proper containment wards in place, and destroyed it the same way. Horcrux 4, the diadem. Destroyed. Which left Nagini. And the war that everyone knew was coming now that Voldemort was back in a body, moving through the shadows of the wizarding world, gathering followers, taking positions. The Death Eaters who had claimed false remorse were quietly realigning. The Ministry was doing what it did under pressure, denying that anything was happening and hoping the problem resolved itself. Harry spent the autumn of his 3rd year doing 3 things simultaneously, attending Hogwarts with the focused intensity of someone who intended to learn everything it had to offer, managing an estate that was now the legal and political bedrock of a significant portion of Wizarding Britain's governance structures, and building. He built alliances with the same methodical care he'd brought to everything since Ragnarok's Round Room. Madame Bones, who understood what the Ministry was failing to do and needed someone outside it to provide structural support. The Hogwarts professors, McGonagall, who had been an ally since before he'd arrived, Sprout, who trusted Neville and by extension trusted Harry, Flitwick, who had been politely waiting for 2 years to have a conversation about pre-ministry charms theory and who turned out to be one of the sharpest minds Harry had encountered. The Order of the Phoenix, which Dumbledore had reformed on the understanding, explicitly stated, legally notarized, and entirely not how organizations usually operated, that Harry was a full member with full information rights and full operational input. That conversation with Dumbledore had been brief and direct. "I'm not joining an organization where decisions are made above my head," Harry had said. "Not again." "No," Dumbledore had said. "Quite right. Not again." The war came properly in the spring of Harry's third year, not as a battle but as a campaign, a series of moves and countermoves across the wizarding political landscape that looked, to those watching from outside, like chaos and looked, to Harry, like a chessboard. He'd been playing it for 3 years. He knew the pieces. The night Voldemort moved on Hogwarts, because of course it was Hogwarts, of course the convergence happened at the place where everything converged, Harry was ready. Not in a corridor. Not alone. He'd done enough corridors alone. He was at the head of a response that included Sirius, who had been training for 6 months and was halfway back to the aura-level capability he'd had before Azkaban, Neville, who was 17 and had grown into someone quietly formidable in the way people became formidable when they'd always been underestimated, Hermione, who had spent 3 years reading everything Harry gave her and then everything else and had an understanding of magical theory that made his own look modest, Dumbledore, who was still the most powerful wizard alive and who was, Harry had come to understand over 3 years of complicated respect, genuinely trying, and a significant portion of the order, properly briefed, properly positioned, working from a plan that Harry and Dumbledore had designed together in November. Nagini came with Voldemort. Harry had prepared for this. In his pocket was the last piece of preserved basilisk fang, sealed in the same containment case as the others. The confrontation in the grounds of Hogwarts was not tidy. It was dark and cold and full of spellfire and the shouts of people who had chosen their side and were fighting for it. Harry moved through it with the focused clarity that was becoming his most reliable quality, not calm, because this was not a calm situation, but clear. He knew what needed doing. He knew the order of operations. He'd built the plan from the same place he'd built everything, from complete information, carefully processed, acted on without hesitation. He found Voldemort near the edge of the Forbidden Forest, in the dark between the trees where the fighting was thin. Nagini was there, coiled and enormous, and Voldemort was there, and the red eyes found Harry immediately. "Potter," he said, and his voice was the graveyard voice, that strange mixture of admiration and enmity that Harry had decided was probably the closest thing to respect that Tom Riddle was capable of. "Last one," Harry said. He looked at Nagini. She was watching him with her flat, alien attention, and through the residual fragment sensitivity, the uncomfortable echo that Morag had warned him about and that had been useful for 2 years, he felt the wrongness in her, the cold beneath the serpent's normal cold. He spoke in Parseltongue for the last time. He told her what she was carrying. He told her what it meant. He told her that she had been made into something she hadn't chosen. She went still. He didn't know if she fully understood. He didn't know how much of her was still herself and how much was the Horcrux's influence. But he looked at her and made his case, because he'd made his case to Sophia in the chamber and Sophia had chosen dignity over conflict, and he believed in giving things the choice. Nagini struck. Not at Harry. At Voldemort. It lasted less than a second and it was decisive. The serpent's fangs were not what killed Voldemort's body, but the disruption they caused, the fracture in the complex magical structure of a man held together by artificial means, was what created the opening. Harry moved into it. The fang in his hand went into the snake at the same moment Voldemort's killing curse went wide, aimed at something that was no longer standing still. The Horcrux in Nagini died. Voldemort screamed. It was the sound of something losing its final anchor, the last hold on existence. The last piece of the fragmented soul snapped, and the dark magic that had sustained Tom Riddle for 60 years with artificial permanence simply had nothing left to hold on to. He collapsed. Harry stood over him and watched it happen and did not feel triumph. He felt something quieter than that. The particular feeling of something that has been in motion for a very long time coming, finally and completely, to rest. Sirius was there. He'd come through the trees in the last seconds and he was there now, breathing hard, wand up, looking at the figure on the ground and then at Harry. "It's done," Harry said. "It's done," Sirius agreed, and his voice had something in it that Harry thought was probably what relief sounded like in someone who'd been waiting for it since 1981. The silence was the loudest thing Harry had ever heard. The aftermath took considerably longer than the event itself, which was generally how aftermath worked. There were proceedings, ministry, Wizarding International, and there was grief, because things had been lost that couldn't be recovered, and there was the slow, complicated work of rebuilding structures that had been damaged, not just in the fighting but in the years of gradual compromise and institutional decay that had preceded it. Harry was involved in all of it. He was 13 years old and he was involved in all of it, which would have seemed extraordinary to almost anyone who hadn't been watching him since he was 8. To the people who had been watching, Ragnarok, Augusta, Castleton, McGonagall, Sirius, it seemed more or less exactly right. He sat in the Wizarding chamber 6 weeks after the final night and listened to the formal proceedings that followed Voldemort's death, and he thought about a room in Gringotts with a green fire and a goblin with amber eyes who had looked at a boy who'd been sleeping in a cupboard and decided to tell him the truth. He thought about what truth did, when you gave it to someone who could use it. He thought about his parents, who he knew now through photographs and stories and the quality of the silence in Potter Manor that still held the shape of them, who had loved him enough to protect him in a way that had never stopped protecting him. He thought about the ledger, the original ledger, the columns of numbers and property names and the word sovereign in its specific column heading, and what it had meant to be 8 years old and see his own name above something so much larger than he'd been allowed to be. Ragnarok caught his eye from the gallery. Harry gave him a brief nod. Ragnarok inclined his head with the particular dignity he brought to everything, which was the dignity of someone who had been doing important work for a very long time and knew its value. After the formal session, Harry walked through the ministry atrium, busy, alive, full of people who were doing the complicated daily work of not being at war, which was more active than it sounded, and out into the London afternoon where Neville and Hermione were waiting on the steps. Neville had a plant under his arm. This was not unusual. How was it? Hermione asked. Long, Harry said. Thorough. Several people said things they should have said years ago and several others said things that still need work. He looked at them. There's a lot to do. Obviously, Hermione said. The educational reforms alone, Harry said, walking down the steps and they fell into step beside him, are going to take at least 2 years to work through the board properly, and that's assuming McGonagall's curriculum proposals don't hit resistance from, Harry, Neville said. Yes. It's Tuesday afternoon, Neville said. The sun is out. Can the educational reforms wait until tomorrow? Harry looked at him. Then up at the sky, which was genuinely blue, London doing its occasional impersonation of a pleasant place to be. What did you have in mind? Harry said. The greenhouse at the manor, Neville said. The mandrakes in the south corner need turning. And I found a secondary propagation from Sophia's sealed chamber that I think is something really interesting. Sophia's chamber, Harry said. How did you get I'm very careful, Neville said, with dignity. Harry looked at Hermione. She shrugged with the expression of someone who had long since accepted that Neville and dangerous magical plants had a relationship she wasn't going to fully understand. Right, Harry said. Mandrakes. They walked through London together, a boy who owned most of Wizarding Britain and didn't particularly think about it in those terms, and his 2 best friends who had been there from almost the beginning, and the afternoon was warm and the city was loud and there was a great deal of work still to do, which Harry thought was fine. There was always more work to do. That was, he had decided, the point. In Gringotts, in a round oak-paneled room with a green fire, the ledger sat in its place on the shelf. The columns were dense and precise, as they had always been, the accounts updated by Griphook every quarter with the meticulous accuracy of centuries-old Goblin record-keeping. At the top of the first page, in the formal notation of Gringotts Heritage Court, the account holder was listed. Lord Harry James Potter Peverell. Active. Account status, fully claimed. Ragnarok looked at it on his way out of the office that evening. He allowed himself one moment of something that was not quite a smile, sharper than a smile, more satisfied, the expression of someone who had handed the right person the right information at the right time and watched the results unfold over 5 extraordinary years. Then he turned off the light and went home. The ledger sat in the dark. It held everything.